Chapter 767. The observation point that Luo Yuan mentioned wasn't big. With Fat Dragon's massive physique, it only took 2 steps to arrive behind the circular observation window. Following that, he reached out his hand and touched the inner layer of the window. He was also sensing the details of the collision between the window and the sandstorm outside. A great spectacle. The will of the true god whose soul was attached to Fat Dragon described it this way. He rarely used the word great, but at this moment, it wasn't easy to find a word that was more in line with reality and his state of mind. Lord True God should have seen it before. Horned Demon once visited this place. Back then, it was a better observation opportunity. He's not a good carrier. Under the propping mulberry trees system, the meaning of this sentence was equivalent to he's not a good believer. On the other side, Jingxin's heart instinctively twitched when he heard this. He subconsciously lowered his head, afraid that the true god would comment on him. However, as the person in question, Horned Demon only stared intently at the observation window. He looked at the thick sandstorm outside with amazement at his level of concentration. The true god's attention was still focused on the sandstorm outside the observation window, so he didn't care about Horned Demon's reaction. He used Fat Dragon's thick fingers to slowly rub against the windshield, feeling the details of the collision between the inside and the outside. At the same time, he said in an especially gentle tone, "Those sand-like fragments have spatial textures. Those sand-like fragments have the texture of space. We don't necessarily understand what space is, but we give it this definition. At the very least, it's an approximation. It makes people feel that if these fragments are pieced together, they will form an additional dimension that can accommodate us." Luo Yuan clapped. "As expected of Lord True God. You sound like you're preaching." "I'm just deliberately mystifying things. If I really knew the truth behind it, why would I need to say so much nonsense?" The true god's attitude was very frank. In front of the mystery that seemed to be within reach, his reputation wasn't that important. He continued to rub the window. It was shaped like a windshield, and it did block the sandstorm outside. However, behind the seemingly simple phenomenon, there was a deep and complicated mechanism. If it's just an ordinary windshield, including this laboratory, and if it's just an ordinary underground building, then nothing will be left behind under the erosion of the sandstorm outside. Such craftsmanship is rare in the world, right? In fact, it's unique. Luo Yuan also walked to the observation window and stood side by side with Fatty Dragon. Ignoring the difference in size, the two people's auras were equally matched. He calmly explained, "Luo Yuandao and his son, along with Bo Qingwen, they slowly constructed this laboratory in the sandstorm that we are currently witnessing. They continuously pushed deeper into the sandstorm. In fact, the main task of constructing and pushing forward was all done by Bo Qingwen. In this field, her talent was displayed without restraint, especially in the middle and late stages. She made progress almost every day, and every 2 or 3 weeks she would have a new discovery." Luo Yuandao, on the other hand, shifted his research field to the practical application of formatting theory. Luo Zhongheng was the most active experimental subject. He could always digest the new results of Luo Yuandao and Bo Qingwen. At that time, everything seemed to be going well, until one day, an unforeseen event occurred and the process was interrupted. Weight structure? What are they using? Materials? Technology? The true god grasped a key word. About that. Luo Yuan stomped his feet, letting everyone present feel the physical nature of the laboratory. "The place we are in seems to be the product of hollowing out the rock strata. In the first 2 years that I came here, I always thought that it was like this. But in fact, this place is pieced together using building blocks." Oh, the true god also said this word. "It's really amazing. As for the raw materials, it is said to be those." Luo Yuan pointed outside the observation window. There was only one thing there, and that was the sandstorm that was so dense that it could no longer be distinguished from the static state. Every fragment is a building block, with a specific shape and nature. Although we don't know why they are broken and how they are restored, with such rich materials, it is still possible to pick apart from them and redesign a small room in your heart. These are Bo Qingwen's original words. Fatty Dragon turned his head and stared blankly at the silent roaring sandstorm outside the window. The others were similar. After knowing the premise, the originally cramped laboratory gave people a completely different feeling. Even if they were here in person, it was hard for them to imagine how Bo Qingwen had pieced together the sand and dust into a building of this scale using the method of building blocks. After so many years, I have returned to the old place. I am also very surprised that it can still maintain its general appearance. Luo Yuan smiled and looked up. No one knew what he was looking at. At the end of his line of sight, there was nothing but the ceiling. Bo Qingwen. Fatty Dragon said this name, which was equivalent to the will of the true God giving extra attention. It sounds like an excellent woman. Why isn't she famous? If even the true God can't really understand her genius and technology, how can you count on those ordinary people? Of course, she is also an excellent architect. Even in the wilderness, her light will shine sooner or later. However, the bad luck of the Luo family infected her, and of course, that bastard. At this moment, no one could see Luo Yuan's expression, but even the true God attached to Fatty Dragon could not continue the conversation for a while. In the end, Luo Yuan turned his face again, still with the same smiling expression. Okay, let's not talk about unpleasant things. Everyone has paid a great price to get the opportunity to visit, study, and inspect the goods. I hope that you won't cause trouble, or even lose your life because of some low-level mistakes, at least in the eyes of former employees like me. So, please allow me to talk about some taboos in the laboratory. At this point, Luo Yuan turned his head to look at the centaur and asked, "You are also a person who has been tossing around here. Have you told everyone?" The centaur glanced at him and ignored him. Luo Yuan was not angry. "Then I'll explain it from the beginning. It's not particularly complicated. There are only 3 basic principles. First, I believe that you all know very well that the sandstorm outside the observation window is not a real sandstorm. Any contact with it that you think is infallible will lead to fatal consequences. Second, don't leave the scope of space you can understand. I mean, this laboratory is your shelter. Only here can you observe the sandstorm more leisurely, and at the same time, you don't have to worry about your own survival. Well, we have been bored here for too long. We might as well go to other areas of the laboratory to recognize the way and identify the safe zone." Luo Yuan left the observation point first, leading a group of people through the corridor of the laboratory, introducing the rooms on both sides. The main structure of the laboratory is like a crab, with a wide and hard carapace and 2 pairs of strong chelicerae stretching out. Its upper body is protruding forward, exposed to the sandstorm, and the back is still attached to the space we are familiar with. Basically, the head and chelicerae are very strong. At least when I am here, I can listen to the sandstorm and the special interference sound of the laboratory and have a good dream. You have seen the laboratory. The circular corridor we are walking in is the chelicerae on one side. We call it the left chelicerae corridor, and the symmetrical side is naturally the right chelicerae corridor. Note that they look like a ring, but they are not connected. There is a room at the end, and if you want to die, you can go in. Here we are. In front of the place where Luo Yuan stopped, there was a seemingly very thick metal door, equipped with a turntable lock similar to that of a traditional vault, highlighting the cautious mentality of the designer. Well, this set of safety doors was installed after Bo Qingwen's death, because without her, the follow-up project was aborted. Before this was actually a place to show off their affection. Luo Yuan's words became strange, and he had no intention of opening the door. However, with the sensing ability of a true god, a mere metal door could not stop him. After a little sensing, he understood. Indeed, the space-time structure is very unstable, and it was basically eroded and destroyed by the sandstorm. This door is actually meaningless, and it mainly relies on a splicing structure similar to the observation point. Is the other side of the corridor the same configuration? Yes, originally, Bo Qingwen wanted to make a vehicle that could move freely in the sandstorm, and called it the tree-hole plan. At the end of the 2 corridors is actually the vehicle parking station. She and Luo Zhongheng each presided over one, and they started work at the same time to compare with each other. But in the end, only a small part of the work was completed, and misfortune came. Luo Yuan turned back. The observation center, the left and right corridors, and the rooms on both sides are basically the scope of the safe zone. At least it was very safe before. After dismantling so many pieces of equipment, there must be some holes, right? Luo Yuan walked with a smile, and suddenly reached out and opened the door of a room on the side. Strangely, in this enclosed underground space, there was a slight airflow passing through, brushing past people's faces. The breeze blew out from the empty room, and correspondingly, there was inexplicably distorted light. Nice watch, lend it to me. Luo Yuan politely took a valuable watch from Detective Hua Dian, and then threw it into the room. Under the distorted light, the watch disappeared without a trace. Sure enough, the work of the Toyama auction house is quite rough. It is said that in this room, when two people were dismantling, they played with time travel. One person safely returned to the ground, but his spine was twisted, and the other person has not been found until now. Hua Dian felt his wrist was sore and painful, and he subconsciously took half a step back. Luo Yuan closed the door. Well, the third rule. Everyone must pray devoutly at all times. Due to the lack of anchoring equipment, there may be similar rooms and areas appearing. When that time comes, everyone can only rely on luck and hope that they don't travel into the sandstorm. Of course, if you can find a large fragment there that can accommodate you and survive, then you will be a lucky person who only appears once in a few decades. That's it. Most people had complicated expressions on their faces. Luck, that's not a good word. Fat Dragon followed the will of the true God and slowly said, but this is the value of Luo Yuandao's laboratory. The endless dust and debris outside is the greatest treasure. But if you don't master the skill to reassemble the fragments, you can only rely on luck. That's basically it. So you guys made that plan to treat us to a meal to let the only child in the world who has materialized formatting theory and proposed configuration theory help you solve the problem of luck. Luo Yuan was still smiling. Don't blame me for being picky, true God. First of all, formatting theory isn't some lost secret manual. You can give me a few of your church's believers now, and I can let you see the results in a month. Of course, after a period of time, I can't guarantee how many people will survive. Secondly, configuration theory isn't the patent of that child. The Apocalypse Laboratory and the Deep Blue Laboratory have even more mature industrialized technology, but they are biased towards physical products and are not related to the high-end needs of the laboratory that involves the structure of space and time. In fact, there is no evidence that the child has this kind of ability. The theoretical technology he has displayed is still limited to the spiritual side or the soul. It's just that the person who proposed the plan and I, the consultant, are all loyal supporters of the bloodline theory. So many people want to see if the kid who inherited Bo Qingwen's bloodline has talent in this area. At the end of the day, this is more like a prayer ceremony before trying your luck. At least that's what I understand. Driven by the true God's will, Fat Dragon's chest shook and he laughed softly. At this moment, someone in the crowd suddenly raised his hand. The one who did this was the centaur. He raised his only left hand and attracted everyone's attention. Under the gazes of the two groups of extraordinaries, he spoke in a hoarse voice. Mr. Luo Yuan, according to my understanding, you should be the luckiest of all the laboratory employees. If, as you said, you don't have the corresponding splicing technology, then you were even luckier to find a fragment with an astonishing volume? How did you move it and use it? Or is it still here, in the depths of this sandstorm? The already narrow left pincer corridor seemed to be about to explode from the centaur's wanton disclosure. Those who knew and those who didn't subconsciously held their breaths as their brains worked quickly. They wanted to see how Luo Yuan would answer and react. The true God who possessed Fat Dragon could have stopped the centaur with a shout, but he didn't. Luo Yuan stared at the centaur, and the smile on his face that revealed the muscles on his cheeks deepened. But in the end he said in an extremely calm tone, "That's a private deal between me and the goddess of destiny. It's not suitable to say it face to face." A hoarse laugh came from the centaur's throat. He didn't continue to ask and just made an evaluation. Chapter 768. Not good. Inlu felt that the situation was far from good when the centaur suddenly opened his mouth in the laboratory. She couldn't tell whether the centaur or Luo Nan was speaking from the centaur's perspective. Inlu was almost certain that Luo Nan's emotions had already seeped into the centaur's body 3,000 kilometers away. Fortunately, due to the centaur's usual crazy behavior, and the corresponding underlying mechanism was hard to imagine, neither Luo Yuan nor the true god who possessed the fat dragon suspected anything. But they didn't need to suspect anything. Luo Nan was about to explode. His face was a mix of green and red, especially when Luo Yuan recklessly evaluated Luo Yuan Dao, Luo Nan and Bo Qingwen. When Luo Yuan spat out the word vile spawn, the storm above the abyss was wrapped in thunder and lightning. It buzzed in the deep sky. Even the Blood Soul Temple that Inlu relied on seemed to groan and sway in the thunderstorm. What would she do if she made a move? What would she do if she leaked her tracks? Inli's mind churned with jumbled thoughts, but she couldn't find a way to dissuade him. It was hard to form an effective response. The setting sun above North Mountain Lake shone down. It was warm, but Inlu already felt the chill of the night ahead of time. She didn't care to look at the centaur's reaction in the distance. She just stared at Luo Nan and prayed in her heart at the same time. But her mind was in chaos as to what she should pray to and who she should pray to. That bitch. Luo Nan suddenly repeated the words that had just echoed in the laboratory. This made Inlu even more certain that the centaur's words and actions were influenced by Luo Nan's interference. She actually didn't quite understand who the so-called bitch was, but Luo Nan being able to open up a channel of communication was already a joyous matter. She hurriedly continued, "You're saying, the goddess of fate. That bitch." Luo Nan rarely used vulgarities, but he was speaking more and more naturally now. And he couldn't stop once he opened his mouth. He continued on without end. She can flirt with countless people at the same time. Then she can randomly choose a lucky person, and let that person enjoy everything alone. She can let others bear the rest of the misfortune. Flirt. Ha, flirting with that bitch. I really believed her nonsense. Inlu opened her mouth, but she was actually speechless. It wasn't that Luo Nan's eloquence was overflowing. Rather, she had already been defeated by Luo Nan's chaotic logic and his corresponding intense emotions. Luo Nan's arm swept across the virtual work area, causing the graphics on the surface to fluctuate and tremble. They were practically unrecognizable. This was undoubtedly an emotional action. It was probably because the psychic diagram reminded him of the so-called flirting theory in the past, and he was seriously displeased. Inlu didn't dare to advise him. She was afraid that she would say something that would provoke Luo Nan. Luo Nan would immediately start a war with the two extraordinaries in the laboratory. Right when she was at a complete loss, she saw Luo Nan's movements suddenly come to a halt. He forgot to retract the arm he had waved. He only used his eyes to stare fixedly at the work area. He stared at the turbulent light and shadow that had yet to completely recover. Inlu turned her gaze as well, but there was nothing within the faint glow of the work area. Aside from the psychic diagram and the structural design diagram that had just recovered from the distortions and turbulences, there was nothing else. She was unable to see any special changes. On the contrary, Luo Nan's aura was constantly changing. That fluctuating aura was like the roaring and churning sea on the psychic diagram. There seemed to be some sort of resonance between the two. Ah, there it is. Inlu chased after Luo Nan's line of sight. She stared at a certain area on the psychic diagram. Actually, she still didn't quite understand, but Luo Nan's deep whisper rang out at the same time, giving her a simple explanation. There's a change. Luo Nan extended his hand. His fingertips touched the scene of the clouds surging above the psychic diagram. He slowly drew his hand over. He only thought of something halfway through and activated the drawing function. He scribbled a few times on this area, and then he drew a few strokes. Then he stopped and sized it up in detail. Actually, the overall structure of the lines and shadows of the psychic diagram hadn't changed too much. But when Luo Nan raised his hand again, Inlu felt that the electric arcs leaping between the clouds and shuttling between the sea tornadoes seemed to be much denser. Correspondingly, the scene of the storm on the psychic diagram gave people an increasingly unbridled and wild feeling. After looking at it for a long time, It was as if the entire scene was cut from the actual scene of the sea and the sky. It pounced directly into the depths of the eyes. This diagram? Inlu didn't know how to describe it for a time. Luo Nan's response was exceptionally fleeting. They can indeed form a connection. The goddess of destiny might be a bitch, but she's always been exceptionally lenient towards the strong. Although this proves that she's a bitch even more. Luo Nan's incoherent words made Inlu even more worried. Luo Nan wasn't angry at this moment. It was as if he had been infected by the deranged horned demon. Luo Nan suddenly turned his head while his thoughts were running wild. He bared his teeth at her and laughed. Oh, I've been infected by that horned demon. Inli's hair stood on end. Luo Nan's smile and words were simply a conversation with her soul. Right now, she was in front of Luo Nan's eyes. Her entire body was glowing red. It was hard to conceal anything. And then there was this tone and style. Luo Nan's eyes were a bit absent-minded, but his mouth was extremely polite. Sorry, I didn't want to scare you. If I didn't do this, I wouldn't have been able to utilize that fellow's special sensory ability. He really is a lunatic and a freak. Inla didn't know what was going to happen next. The logic of a lunatic was simply impossible to understand and predict. Even in front of Luo Nan, who seemed to be able to see through her soul, she still had this thought. Otherwise, she would have been driven insane. Right when Inlu was in a state of fear, the turbulent atmosphere in Luo Yuandao's laboratory over 3,000 kilometers away gradually calmed down. People were already used to Horn's deranged behavior. In addition to the magnanimity of the two extraordinaries, the group of people acted as if nothing had happened. They continued to familiarize themselves with the laboratory's environment under Luo Yuan's guidance. They searched for places of interest and value. They also verified whether or not the auction items and corresponding prices were appropriate. Everyone had a ruler in their hearts. They all had their own standards, so they slowly spread out and acted on their own. Luo Yuan didn't mind. He led the group around the laboratory and considered his mission accomplished. He stayed at the observation point and chatted with the will of the true god, who also stayed there. Jingxin, a subordinate follower of the Amaterasu cult, stayed by his side. He was trembling with fear and filled with jealousy. He was jealous that the other follower in name, the Horned Demon, could leave so boldly. Was this preferential treatment for a lunatic? The Horned Demon didn't care what other people thought. He directly turned to the right claw corridor, where he had spent less time before. He walked all the way to the end of the corridor, and as expected, he saw a metal door that looked like a vault. He was not alone. Detective Hua Dian had the same ambition as him. The latter was only half a minute later than him. When she saw the centaur's back, she hesitated for a moment before leaning over to greet him. She started a conversation as if she was chatting. Brother Horned Demon, are you interested in this place? Sigh. If Mr. Luo Yuan's tree hole project was completed, the value of this laboratory would increase tenfold. What a pity. Yes, it's a pity. The Horned Demon's answer was perfunctory. However, he still paid extraordinary attention to the room behind the metal door that was bound to be destroyed. Even a blind person could see it. Hua Dian followed the Horned Demon's focus and tried to obtain more valuable information from this lunatic who had entered the palace twice. I really want to open this door and take a look. Hey. When she saw the Horned Demon's actions, Hua Dian felt like her hair was about to explode. She instantly retreated 7 to 8 meters, almost to the other end of the circular corridor. The Horned Demon's hand was already turning the wheel, but he didn't open the door. Perhaps he didn't know the password. He finally placed his hand on the wheel and asked a question that seemed rather idiotic. Why is it called the Tree Hole Project? What's the criteria for the name? Hua Dian wanted to say something like, I have nothing to say to a lunatic like you. Please stay away from me. However, the habit of commercial espionage allowed him to continue the conversation as much as possible and deepen the communication. Brother Horned Demon should have also detected the environment behind the door. If the other side hasn't changed beyond recognition, isn't its structure just a long and narrow tree hole? Of course, if it's flat, it's a long shuttle. Then why not just call it a shuttle? Or a rocket? Hua Dian indicated that this conversation with a low IQ and high insanity attribute couldn't be continued. The horned demon didn't care if he didn't get an answer from Hua Dian. Or rather, from the beginning, the horned demon and the will in the depths of his heart didn't expect to get an answer from anyone. He just took this opportunity to observe, think, and judge. Now that he had a corresponding result, the horned demon slammed the wheel hard. He turned around and strode away amidst the rumbling sound of the metal door. A layer of cold sweat had already accumulated on Hua Dian's back. He didn't want to have anything to do with this lunatic. He raised his hand to let the horned demon go, sending him off with his eyes. Luonan suddenly stood up on the Ray yacht on North Mountain Lake. He issued an order under Yin Li's blank gaze. Prepare the teleportation array. I want to return to Xia City. Now. Yin Li shivered and quickly stood up to respond. Anytime, mister. I've already arranged for people to rearrange the materials during the day, but for safety reasons, I'll have to ask you to do another test. I'll have the yacht go over right now. No need. I'm fine by myself. Luonan walked to the edge of the sundeck and kicked the heavy metal case that was placed there. The mechanical components immediately activated and adjusted their positions. The case's lid opened, and Luonan stood in the two shallow grooves that accommodated his feet. His body fell down slightly, and then he was lifted up by the body. Thousands of metal components corresponded to each other under the control of the AI. They revolved around Luonan's body and combined in many ways. They formed an exoskeleton armor that enveloped Luonan's entire body within 5 seconds. There are still some supplementary materials at Point B. I'm going there. Then I'll turn back to Xia City. You keep watch over the teleportation array. I should be back soon. What did he want to do? Chapter 769. Luonan relied on the spatial resonance connection between the transmission array and gear of the North Bank to construct a transit channel through the cloud world. He traveled through the void and returned to the main laboratory area of gear of the North Bank's underground 6th floor. Aside from the problem of energy consumption during resonance and jumps, as well as the wear and tear of the devices that carried the energy, everything was perfect. Successive experiments and practices conducted in Ban City and Spring City proved the reliability of this method. Such elusive methods were no longer enough to excite Luonan. His face buried behind the metal visor was without the slightest ripple. He just closed his eyes and adapted a bit to the slight discomfort caused by the long-distance spatial travel. The military-grade AI, Standard Bearer, automatically turned on the illumination power of the laboratory area when it sensed Luonan's return. It sent over some of the work progress of the AI's recent analysis. A continuous stream of information notifications rang out. The virtual screen on Luonan's retina kept popping up with titles and keywords. He wasn't in the mood to look at these right now. He ignored all of them. Speaking of which, Luonan hadn't been here for 3 or 4 days. The reason he gave to the outside world was to clean up the corresponding experimental equipment and make preparations to leave school. This reason was really weak. Whether it was the Xia City branch or the relevant personnel of the Mystic Arts Research Society, no one would believe it. But it didn't matter. No one would expose him. However, he received a few messages the moment he reconnected to the psychic wave network. Most of them came from He Yuan and Bro Octopus. The others were fine, but the last message he received made Luonan's attention focus a bit. It was an electronic invitation. The interface design was quite exquisite. It seemed to be of a very high level. Looking at the signature on the interface, it came from the Fushan auction house. It was a completely logical and provocative target. To Mr. Luonan. Luonan read the opening and his face behind the visor finally formed a cold arc. His gaze flickered as he ignored the meaningless, hypocritical, and polite words. He captured the most crucial information. The Jadeite Light. May 6th. Set sail from Ban City. High Seas Auction. May 16th. Special auction of the Jadeite Light. Relying on the electronic invitation, people could board the ultra-luxurious cruise ship, the Jadeite Light, on May 6th. They would travel by sea for 10 days and participate in the top-notch auction. Of course, guests who felt that time was precious could also take a private plane and arrive on the same day. The electronic invitation even had a list of auction items and a corresponding introduction. The name Luo Yuandao laboratory coordinates and supporting equipment was impressively listed. At first glance, it looked a bit crude compared to the other magnificent works of art. But in Luo Yuandao laboratory coordinates, it was the value of all the other auction items added together. Yes, the value referred to the value of the laboratory itself. Luo Yuandao had to. If the Fushan auction house and the designer of the treat plan still believed that Luo Nan would be grasped by this sort of thing, then they would only be disappointed. Luo Nan had already found his grandfather's laboratory. He had used inconceivable methods to experience and feel the various mysteries within for himself. The laboratory coordinates held practically no meaning to Luo Nan. Bank Luo Laboratory of Luo Coordinates of the Laboratory of Coordinates of Laboratory of the Laboratory of Luo of Institute of Laboratory of the Institute of the Laboratory of the Luo Laboratory of Luo Nan immediately switched the interface. He would leave the invitation letter there for now. The premise for him to accept the invitation was to continue to feign civility with that whore, the goddess of fate. And in order to confirm this premise, he needed to do the corresponding verification. This was the reason why he rushed back from Ban City. Rue 1. Luo Nan called out softly. Though the sound waves were unable to transmit to his home, which was several dozen kilometers away, the psychic waves were able to reach far and wide. Rue 1 was doing her homework in her room. Her figure blurred and disappeared the moment she heard the call. She leaped into deep space. Luo Nan and Rue 1 cooperated flawlessly. They integrated the special configuration of gear of the North Bank to open a new spatial passageway. It just so happened to intersect with Rue 1's shuttle trajectory. Then they left the local spacetime together to cut into the cloud world. The transmission array erected above North Mountain Lake of Ban City actually had this function as well. But the scale and degree of rigor were far inferior to gear of the North Bank. Needless to say, there were unexpected risks from wear and tear. The fact that Luo Nan was able to consider this proved that his mind was quite calm. He was unexpectedly calm. The high-altitude air currents and surging clouds of the cloud world came head-on. They seemed monotonous, but they brought along a wealth of information about this world. However, Luo Nan was completely uninterested in these superficial things right now. He just spoke softly to Rue 1 beside him. "Let's go to our ambush." Rue 1 was able to sense Luo Nan's mood. She didn't say much. She immediately entered the special state of body and soul merging. In this state, she linked and resonated with the complex and chaotic multi-layered structure of the void. Then she cut open the scene of mist on the surface of the cloud world, revealing an entrance that led to the deeper layers of the labyrinth world. This exposed the gray, turbid, and chaotic maze of mist within. It was as if an ugly wound had been torn open in the cloud world. But this wound was rapidly healing. Luo Nan knew that time was of the essence. He quickly adjusted his breath and once again confirmed that the self-examination of the exoskeleton armor was normal. Then he dove headfirst inside. When he dove into the gray and gloomy turbid mist, the crack in the void closed up and was completely sealed. The corresponding light that came from the outside world also completely disappeared. Luo Nan no longer had anything to rely on. The only thing he could rely on was himself. The terrifying pressure within the mist labyrinth assaulted him at the same time. The configuration fragments numbered in the trillions and trillions of them formed a torrent of information that oppressed the mental plane. And the collapsing and shattering structure of the void itself created a destructive force that could crush and tear everything to shreds. It wanted to grind all things from source and non-source into dust, and even into nothingness. Luo Nan very rarely entered this dangerous plane with his fleshly body. In fact, if he had entered with his fleshly body for the first time, there was a high probability that his body would have been smashed to pieces by now. Even now, Luo Nan faced such terrible environmental conditions. It was the same as playing a balancing game on the jagged edge of a meat grinder. The so-called balancing was the speed at which he pieced together the configuration fragments. It was the dynamic change between the destructive impact and interference of the powerful pressure in the surroundings. Luonan stood at the very center of the gray and white space. This place was like the simple and crude initial environment before the start of a virtual reality game. It was also like a rough house that didn't have any decorations at all. One could even see the texture of bricks and concrete that weren't all that exquisite. The radius of the space was roughly 30 meters or so. It was 10 times greater than the initial radius of 3 meters he sensed in the mist labyrinth. Of course, if one were to calculate the volume of the space, then it would be an expansion of over 3,000 times. If placed in the real world, it would be equivalent to a medium-sized shopping mall. Even if Luonan used reinforced concrete to construct this space, it would still be a rather large project. Moreover, Luonan used even more precise and complex methods. He used a jigsaw puzzle, a building block method. Luonan viewed the boundless and endless configuration fragments as raw materials. He pondered over the laws and rules that were completely different from the ordinary nature of matter. According to the nature of each fragment and particle, as well as his understanding of the configuration system, he pieced together these tiny, bizarre powder fragments that didn't even possess a physical body. He gradually strengthened their hardness and support, allowing them to grow little by little under the destructive pressure, gradually expanding their range. Luonan went from slow to fast, from sluggish to smooth, from bewilderment to clarity over the course of 4 months. Finally, he constructed a foundation that he could live on. At the same time, it was a unique domain that allowed his own abilities to be put into practice. This method was very familiar, right? That's right. It was exactly the same construction method that Luo Yuan spoke about in the laboratory that belonged exclusively to Bo Qingwen. It was of the same origin. A son learning from a stepmother. This was a matter worthy of celebration, but it was also a reasonable matter. Luonan accepted the theory of the virtual brain system of the external neuron. He also received his mother's research papers and notes from Professor Pan. This was the most logical development. It was also the most comfortable karmic cycle. In this aspect, the goddess of fate wasn't too much of a bitch. Luonan hadn't flipped the table on the spot before. A large part of this factor was a buffer. Right now Luonan wanted to start from this embryonic domain space. He wanted to verify whether or not there was a deeper, closer connection between this domain space and the laboratory that was built in the same way. Not just in terms of construction theory and method, but also on a more complex, more realistic level. The chance to prove that you aren't such a bitch has come. Luonan spoke to the goddess of fate. If there really was such a god in the unseen world, then it's the same dust-filled sandstorm. It's the same embodiment of the collapse of spacetime. It's the same inventor, researcher, and theoretical source. Such a spectacle. Such elements. Could there be a second group on Earth, or even in the surrounding regions? If there's such a clumsy and absurd coincidence, then you really are hopelessly bitchy. The goddess of fate didn't admit it. She didn't deny it either. Instead, she adopted her usual ambiguous posture. The powerful pressure of the dust-filled sandstorm suddenly intensified. At the same time, bluish-white electricity leaped up from the exoskeleton armor Luonan wore. The corresponding electromagnetic muscle structure warped and swelled. It connected with the vibrations transmitted from the powerful pressure in the surroundings. It collided with the vibrations transmitted from the powerful pressure in the surroundings. There were even more complex resonances and interference. A portion of the space outside Luonan's body warped and rippled amidst the crackling noise. There was a tendency to disintegrate once more. Luonan didn't even blink his eyes at this. Tch. There's an error in pure calculations. The ambush circle underestimated the physical laws of the electromagnetic configuration. Fine adjustments are certain. The problem is, even an idiot can guess it. Don't you find it disgusting to use it to tease me? Of course, the goddess of fate wouldn't respond. Luonan didn't count on it. In any case, the agitated emotional pressure that had accumulated in Luonan's heart was clearly alleviated amidst this treacherous conversation. Luonan was no longer anxious to obtain an answer. He just slightly adjusted his floating posture. He adopted a fist stance according to Gym Master Xiu's teachings. He hooked his hand at the distorted and rippling nothingness. Chapter 770. Rue Wen's figure disappeared into the chaotic void once more. It was unknown when she would reappear. Luo Nan panted heavily as he hovered in the central region of the ambush circle. He slowly spun around. The muscles of his entire body were twitching slightly, and he was sweating profusely. The life support module of the exoskeleton armor had long since lost its function. In fact, this armor was already in tatters. From time to time, the outer armor and parts would peel off, and then they would be drawn into the incorporeal vortex of warped waves. They would shatter and shatter, until they were annihilated into nothingness. Rue Wen had never truly struck during the training process. All of the damage to the exoskeleton armor did not come from ordinary physical attacks. Instead, it came from the distortion and erosion of the ambush circle and the sandstorm even further outside. This was the rejection of the rules. Even if Luo Nan wore 100 layers of armor, as long as the force exertion, operation, and even the existence itself did not conform to the jointing rules of this domain space, he would inevitably suffer a powerful repulsive pressure. This was the case for Luo Nan, and the tools he had transformed with his own hands. There was no need to talk about treating outsiders like this. And this was the fundamental reason why this space was named the Ambush Circle. Luo Nan's sparring with Rue Wen had unwittingly gone on for nearly half an hour. Even though the weak electromagnetic muscle structure could not hold on long ago and turned into flying ash, Rue Wen did not stop. This seemed to deviate from Luo Nan's goal in coming here. The problem was that he really could not stop in time. The glaring mistake was right before his eyes. He could not turn a blind eye to it, right? Whether it was the ambush circle or the amalgamation of the exoskeleton armor and the electromagnetic muscle structure, they were all key props used to deal with Gong Qi. The running in and coordination between them were exceptionally important. Luo Nan needed to make them integrate as perfectly as possible. At the very least, they would not drag him down in this extreme battle. True perfection did not exist. Of course, Luo Nan wanted everything to operate according to the established theoretical rules. He wanted this space to become like President Ouyang's logic world, a basically perfect and self-consistent extraordinary domain. But whether it was the exoskeleton armor, the electromagnetic muscle structure, or even his own skeleton, they were all constructed under the physical rules of the local spacetime. There would certainly be inconsistencies and areas of incompatibility when placed in the ambush circle constructed purely from configuration theory. There would even be conflicts in the underlying structure. Every problem that appeared required Luo Nan to rack his brains to think of a solution or a temporary compromise plan. Hiss. Rue Wen appeared behind Luo Nan like a ghost. She gave Luo Nan a light pat on the shoulder. Luo Nan shuddered. The reaction of his body and soul was out of sync. He wanted to drive the exoskeleton armor to exert force, but this caused a small portion of his back armor to tear off. Then it disintegrated into nothingness. Phew, let's stop here for now. The consumption of physical strength was secondary. The consumption of mental strength and energy was the reason why Luo Nan called a halt. Rue Wen stopped in the first instance. She stood quietly in front of Luo Nan. Luo Nan took off the exoskeleton armor with great difficulty. In fact, this toy was no longer in shape after it was taken off. It could pretty much be thrown into the junkyard. I still have to keep this. When I get back, I'll let the flag bearer test it and make a combat analysis model. Thank you for making this trip. Also help me apply for 5 sets, no 10 sets of components. Since there are problems, we have to solve them in time. Strive to have the version updated within 3 days. As for me, I still want to stay here for a while. At the very least, I need to stabilize the trap. Rue Wen still didn't speak. She maintained her usual silence. She just looked over seriously, showing her worry for Luo Nan's state. Luo Nan laughed as he rubbed her head. Relax. Our hearts are linked. I'll call you at any time, and you'll be on call. There definitely won't be any problems. The focus of today's work isn't here. He coaxed and persuaded Rue Wen to leave. Luo Nan stayed in the ambush circle by himself. He didn't make any particularly large movements. He just circulated his soul strength to make corrections to the building block splicing rules based on the various inharmonious problems he discovered earlier. Then he took the inexhaustible and inexhaustible materials of the configuration fragments in the surroundings to replenish them one after another. This was mental work and meticulous work. Before he knew it, more than 2 hours had passed. The surrounding gray space gradually broke away from the state of warping and rippling. Especially the border region, which had been eroded by nearly a quarter, was pushed back once more. The border was basically maintained in stability. However, the internal construction mechanism had undergone a subtle change compared to 3 hours ago. There's never enough time. Luonen felt a bit dizzy when he exhaled once more. It's okay. I did some sampling and analysis work in passing. Whether it's the concentration, the density, or the frequency at which specific configurations appear, there really isn't much of a difference between the two sides of the sandstorm. If it's under the effect of the same force, then with sufficient agitation, many phenomena can be explained. The first verification has passed. You've got one less excuse. Luonan accepted this result with an ordinary heart. He gave a thumbs up to a certain whore god in the nothingness. Then he followed the laws of the North Bank's gear and returned to the local spacetime. When he appeared again, he was already in a narrow and gloomy space. This was the interior of the withered tree in the sandbar a kilometer away from the North Bank gear. This was the private space that belonged to his parents, and it also belonged to him. It was also another destination of Luonan's in Xia City. The anchor point between the tree hole space and the cloud world was the lounge at the bottom level. Luonan sat on the circular chair with great precision. His back leaned against the wall of the tree. Combined with the dizziness from the jump in space-time, it was as if he had just woken up from a short nap. Everything that happened just now was just a dream of nothingness. Unfortunately, right now isn't the time to dream. It's time to work. The second verification has begun. Luonan stood up and held on to the inner wall of the tree hole. He walked up to the second level of the tree hole at an extremely slow speed. According to the original design, this place should be a workshop. Back then, his mother and that person should have let their imaginations run wild in this narrow space, obtaining inspiration. And then? Was there a deeper function? Luonan wouldn't have thought this much before today. But when he was in his grandfather's laboratory, when he saw the building structure at the end of the two circular corridors, although it was already warped and deformed, it still maintained a general shape. When he heard the fragments of events from the past that Luo Yuan spoke of, his thoughts couldn't help but grow wings, extend claws, and anchored this place anew. The tree hole plan. Why a tree hole? Luo Yuan's explanation was to show off their affection. Perhaps this fellow knew a portion of the North Bank gear, and even the matters of the ancient tree sandbar. He knew that this place, designed and built by his mother, contained a special emotional meaning. But could it be that there wasn't a more realistic meaning? Luonan touched the structure of the tree hole bit by bit. He was able to feel the rigid yet moist sensation of the dried-up tree soaked in water vapor. He was able to distinguish the tough texture of the biochemical filler in the middle. He was even able to grasp a bit of the regular molecular chain structure. But outside of these surface and internal structures, there weren't any configuration fragments that Luonan imagined, that he hoped would be mixed with the texture of the space-time structure. It was just like the laboratory in the wasteland. It was just like the ambush circle in the cloud world. The facts proved that it wasn't like that at all. Could it be that I was wrong? Luonan used nearly 5 minutes to dawdle from the first level to the second level. His fingerprints were rubbed flat on the withered tree bark, and the precision of his mental senses was raised to the limit. But he still didn't discover anything. Instead, the aftereffects of using his senses to correct the configuration design in the ambush circle gradually appeared. His exhaustion and drowsiness increased, and his attention showed signs of scattering. Phew! Luonan spat out a mouthful of turbid air. He opened the hidden viewing window on the second level of the tree hole, allowing the night and the cool wind of the end of spring to pour in. He stood in front of the window, staring blankly at the faint silhouette of gears building in the dusky night. His mind went blank for a moment before his thoughts came back. Perhaps he really was thinking too much. Luonan pressed his temples and began to consider things from a different perspective. After all, the symbol of the tree hole was far too conspicuous. Luo Yuan was clearly an insider. His mother and that person might have hidden the secret of the tree hole plan here. Even if they did hide it, they might not be able to hide it from Luo Yuan's search. After all, this was Acumen College. It was a public area that anyone could come to. It wasn't suitable to be a place to hide secrets. But wasn't gear itself the greatest and best hidden secret? Luo Nan's emotions and reason were fighting. He slapped his forehead and forced himself to be a bit more clear-headed. He considered things from a more realistic perspective. Didn't the space of the tree hole undergo a secret transformation around the year 87? And the person who transformed it was suspected to be a staff member of Yen Hong's laboratory at the time. He used this place as a secret hideout to do some shady business that no one knew about. Luo Nan had discovered this the first time he arrived at the tree hole, but he didn't have any leads later on. He had a few guesses in his mind, but it was hard to verify them. He could only leave them unsettled. Now that his mind was open, he couldn't help but think. Could it be that Luo Yuan was the one who transformed this place and hid it here? No. Most of the intelligence indicated that Luo Yuan had been roaming the wilderness all this time after his grandfather's laboratory was shut down. He continued his research in the fields of genes, cloning, human body modification, and so on. He even established the Gene Exchange, a large black market that specialized in supplying living laboratory consumables. He probably didn't have the time or energy to hide in Yen Hong's laboratory for a long period of time. Moreover, he clearly didn't walk the path of the archetype format. Luo Nan denied his own wild imagination and let out a breath of relief. But as his thoughts spun, a certain possibility that he had been pondering over in the pit of his heart suddenly emerged from the shadows of his thoughts. Actually, there was still one more person. Chapter 771. The table and the viewing window faced each other. They relied on the inner wall of the withered tree to form a semi-cylindrical space. It didn't feel cramped at all. As for the low stool below the table, it was sculpted according to the natural protrusion of the withered tree. It was filled with the interest of nature, and it was extremely comfortable. It embodied first-rate design and craftsmanship. Luo Nan sat on the stool, and the table was level with Luo Nan's chest. It was a bit high for him, but it should be a relatively comfortable position for an adult in this narrow space. Luo Nan sat here with his elbows resting on the table. The circular base of the electronic photo frame was right in front of him. With a light swipe, the light from the projection area pushed away the surrounding darkness, revealing the smiling appearance of his mother leaning against the tree all those years ago. Luo Nan looked at it in a daze. He looked at the brows and eyes that were vaguely similar to his own, but they were brighter and sharper. The finger pointed towards the camera seemed to be greeting him. Yep. It wasn't a normal hello or the like. It was more like a hurry up and catch up type of urging. Luo Nan maintained his sitting posture while leaning on the table. His mind inexplicably scattered once more. He suddenly thought of something. Back in the day, why did the fellow who hid here for who knows how many years keep this electronic photo frame? And why did he place it in the most conspicuous place? Every night in the deep and silent darkness, did that person do the same as he did right now? Within the faint light of the projection, he received the smile and encouragement that came from the distant past. Luo Nan's heart suddenly spasmed. This even drained away most of the strength in his body, to the point where he was no longer willing to think about anything. He no longer maintained his stance, allowing his body to collapse. His chin rested on the back of his hand that was resting on the table. He continued to look at his mother's bright and clear smile. He didn't mind that his consciousness continued to slide into a hazy and muddle-headed state. In this way, perhaps the distance in the river of time would shorten. The barrier between life and death would warp. There would no longer be a boundary between reality and nothingness between him and his mother. He could make a fair demand of his mother. Just give me a hint, okay? Actually, I'm very smart. His mother within the light still had that same smile. Luo Nan looked stupidly. He didn't know when, but the swaying light of water and mist blocked his front, blurring the silhouette of the image. Luo Nan's consciousness became drowsy and dark within this blurry light and shadow. He hadn't had a good rest for nearly 100 hours. In Ban City, he had to bear the double pressure of being pressed for time and a powerful enemy. In the wasteland, for the sake of his grandfather's laboratory, he had a battle of wits with Luo Yuan and True God Extraordinaries. In the misty labyrinth, he had also made high-precision repairs to the ambush circle. He had indeed reached his limit. Therefore, in the blurry light and shadow of life and death, in the narrow space where his mother's scent still lingered, the tide-like emotions finally overflowed the high ground of his will and dragged him into a dark dream. An unknown amount of time passed before a rustling sound entered Luo Nan's ear. It stimulated Luo Nan, causing him to wake up. Though there were noises, there were no signs of danger. Luo Nan was still lying on the table. His thoughts were a bit sluggish, but his mental senses naturally mapped the situation of the target into his mind. Jerry. Yes, it was Xie Juanping's godson, his eldest nephew, the muskrat that had an extraordinary interest in the tree hole. The little thing would often travel through the tree hole. It seemed to use the tree hole as a base of operations. Moreover, it loved cleanliness. It hated that it couldn't clean this place until it was spotless. Back then, Luo Nan and Xie Juanping suspected that someone once resided in the tree hole. They installed a camera and captured the little thing. Xie Juanping and Xie Juanping even engaged in a long and drawn-out battle. In the end, it ended with Jerry surrendering to Rue 1. Whether it was Luo Nan or Xie Juanping, they both wanted to figure out the physiological or psychological mechanism behind Jerry's connection with the tree hole. But in the end, they left the matter unsettled. They just knew that the little thing's intelligence was outstanding among its kind. Coupled with its athletic ability that far exceeded its peers, there was quite a bit of a possibility of it being deformed. However, over the past few months, it had long since proven that its temperament was mild. It had been injected with all sorts of vaccines, so it wasn't a threat at all. Part of the muskrat's habit of building caves was reflected in Jerry's care of the tree hole. Generally speaking, muskrat caves had two exits. One was underwater, and the other was on the shore. Jerry dug an exit at the bottom of the tree hole that led to the lake below the sandbar. Even though he was quite familiar with gear, he wouldn't go through the underwater corridor, a dangerous area where people came and went. Instead, he would come through the waterway. A third of the nearly 10-meter-long slanted tunnel was above water level. Even during the high water season, Jerry leaped in from the water, running and shaking his tail all the way. By the time he entered the tree hole, his fur was more or less in a half-dry state. Even so, he still shook violently on the stone steps at the bottom of the tree hole. He only climbed up the stone steps after the water droplets were almost all shaken off. The little fellow's senses were quite sharp. He felt that something was off in the resting room on the first floor of the tree hole. He lowered his body and shrank back, but he soon determined a familiar aura and relaxed. He shook his plump body and made his way straight up to the second floor of the tree hole. Luo Nan didn't mind such a chance encounter. This wasn't the first or second time they met. On the contrary, Jerry appeared quite excited when he saw Luo Nan. He simply charged over and crashed into the inner wall of the tree before turning back. He didn't care about his half-wet, half-dry fur and fiercely rubbed against Luo Nan's calf. Having a lively little thing by his side was much better than being alone and depressed. Luo Nan hooked his lips. Though he was still suppressed by his heavy emotions, he was still lying on the table, unwilling to get up. He lowered a hand and scratched the little fellow's body twice. Other than that, the half-wet, half-dry fur didn't feel as good as when it was dry and fluffy. Luo Nan saw that Jerry still wanted to rub against his body, and a layer of blue and white electric flames flickered between his fingers. It pierced the little fellow, causing his long bristles to explode. The electrical resistance of the fur would decrease greatly when it came into contact with water. The damage from the electric current passing through would be greater. However, Luo Nan's control was extremely effective. He used electromagnetic configuration interference to temporarily create a nearly insulating physical structure. Aside from an increase in temperature, there were no other effects when the electric current passed through. Instead, The electric current turned into waves of warm wind as Luo Nan fiddled with it. Jerry's fur quickly became fluffy and dry under this combing. Such methods proved that Luo Nan's special training in Ban City over the past few days had remarkable results. Jerry knew that Luo Nan wouldn't hurt him, so he stayed quiet for a few seconds as the electric current flowed back and forth. He waited for his body to return to being dry before he whimpered and rubbed against his pants, asking for a hug. Of course, Rue Wen was the #1 target of reverence and intimacy in the little fellow's circle of life. Perhaps it was because she was the first person to introduce him? Next, Luo Nan and Cat Eyes were more or less the same. Cat Eyes usually played with him a bit more, while Luo Nan was clearly affected by Rue Wen's radiation. As for the little fellow's biological father, Xie Junping, he was ranked 4th. It was already quite good. However, Luo Nan really didn't want to budge right now. He just used his fingertips to stroke the little fellow's short and pointed head. Jerry had a rough understanding of Luo Nan's state after a moment. He displayed his subjective initiative, grabbing Luo Nan's pants and pulling them down. He borrowed a bit of strength to leap up onto the stool, and onto Luo Nan's back. He jumped down from Luo Nan's right shoulder, and just happened to land in the empty space of the table, where Luo Nan's right arm hung down. He displayed an agility that didn't match his plump body and most of his kind. Just how big was the table? Jerry's body was over 20 centimeters long, and he was quite stout. Even though his tail was swinging outside and his body was still curled up, he still occupied a small half of the space. His long bristles streaked across Luo Nan's cheeks, and even the corners of his eyes, forcing Luo Nan to move back. This naturally broke his stance, and made it impossible for him to lie on the table like a corpse. "Tsku." Luo Nan spoke halfway, but he wasn't really angry. He couldn't lie on his stomach right now, but he didn't have much strength. His left elbow was still resting on the table, supporting his cheeks. He raised his hanging right hand and pressed down heavily twice on Jerry's head. His fingertips could feel the friction between the little fellow's flesh and skull. Jerry's skin was coarse and thick, so he didn't mind it at all. His throat even emitted a gurgling sound. He seemed quite comfortable. Luo Nan's mood improved a bit with this silly and adorable fellow. His hands became much gentler. The little fellow felt that it wasn't stimulated enough at this time. His curled body swayed back and forth without stopping. His tail, which had grown to the length of his body, was swinging around with a crackling sound. "Be good, Jerry." Luo Nan added a bit of strength and pressed the little fellow's head against the table, indicating that he should be a bit more well-behaved. "You need to be polite. Look, this is right in front of my mother's eyes." What should I call you?" Luo Nan was distracted pondering over the question of how to address him, and Jerry took the opportunity to exert strength to struggle free. His eyeballs swiveled a few times, and he was able to clearly see the projected photo to the side with great difficulty. A low gurgling sound came from his throat, and his chubby body stood up like a human. He only used his relatively strong hind legs to support himself. His short front claws reached out, as if he wanted to fiddle with the area of light and shadow in front of him. He absolutely couldn't touch his mother's photo carelessly. Luo Nan pressed down on Jerry's head again, and the little fellow's plump body was nearly unable to maintain balance. He swayed left and right, nearly falling off the table. Even so, his front claws were still waving about. His throat went squeak-squeak, and gurgling without end. "Be good or else I'll throw you out." Luo Nan's tone was a bit more severe, and Jerry immediately calmed down. He stood obediently, and the range of his front claws' movements became smaller. In this way, Luo Nan discovered that Jerry's movements and posture didn't resemble a photo. It seemed to be making bigger gestures, and it even pointed and wrote and drew in the middle. It was full of humanity. This is imitating me." Luo Nan understood a bit. The little fellow's eyesight wasn't good. He saw the projection area of the electronic photo frame, but he felt that it was too small. It was different from the virtual work area that Luo Nan normally used. He was commanding Luo Nan to enlarge it. But wasn't this little fellow's memory a bit too good? Didn't he show it a few times? Forget it. Luo Nan would just treat it as coaxing a child. The electronic photo frame on the table was quite old-fashioned. It was impossible to enlarge it in the projection area, so Luonan handled the errand. He mobilized the external neuron to open up his own virtual work area. The adaptive function of the projection software was quite impressive. It detected that the area behind him was a circular arc, and it automatically adjusted itself. It was perfectly embedded into the concave space of the tree wall. The boundary was seamless, and it didn't receive any special spatial interference. It looked quite pleasing to the eye. How is it? Comfortable now? Luonan scratched the back of Jerry's head. The fur underneath the long spiky hair was soft and warm. It felt absolutely wonderful to the touch. Jerry also calmed down, obediently returning to its crouching and curled up position. It just raised its head and looked at the image of the virtual work area. Bit by bit, it was extremely satisfied. It also seemed to have a very focused appearance. The image in the virtual work area, the psychic diagram, and the configuration design diagram were all complex and cumbersome. Only the heavens knew what the little fellow could see. Luonan's finger moved up and down along with Jerry's head. Occasionally, it would even sway back and forth. He just felt that it was funny. Look at you like this. I'll just call you Mouse from now on. Gurgling sounds came from Jerry's throat. Its head continued to sway up and down, left and right. Luonan still wanted to pull it back a few times, but his palm and fingers stayed in contact for a long time. He felt that the temperature of the little fellow's body clearly changed under its fur. Chapter 772. Jerry's body temperature rose extremely quickly. Luonan felt that Jerry's body temperature had risen by at least 4 or 5 degrees in the span of a few breaths. Luonan was proficient in the mental side of perception, so he was able to grasp this bit of precision. The body temperature of a mammal hovered around 37 degrees. Exceeding this range would cause a clear change in the body's functions. Most of the proteins and enzymes within an organism's body would be deactivated when the temperature entered the range of 40 to 41 degrees. The body's various tissues and organs, especially the brain, would be severely damaged. This wasn't a good sign in any case. Jerry? Luonan picked up the little fellow and examined it carefully. The little fellow was a bit unwilling. Its forelimbs struggled, and its head kept turning towards the direction of the virtual work area. It looked like it hadn't seen enough. This was quite strange. Any mammal would wither at a temperature above 40 degrees. How could it be like this little fellow, still brimming with vigor? His strength was a bit greater than before. Was this the reason for the distortion? Luonan increased the strength in his hand. His palm and fingers slid across Jerry's plump body. There were also high-energy electromagnetic short waves that were transmitted densely. Luonan sensed the changes in Jerry's fur, muscles, bones, and even internal organs. Yes, the little fellow's heart was beating very quickly. His muscles were twitching intensely, but they hadn't lost their activity. His control was still there. His blood flow was very smooth. His bodily functions weren't damaged. His body's thermoregulatory center and other cooling functions were still functioning normally. Jerry's body temperature continued to rise during the examination. It had long since surpassed the upper limit that a mammal could endure. Under these circumstances, Jerry's body inevitably underwent some changes. Luonan felt that the little fellow's soft fur had become much harder. It was even a bit prickly. Its body seemed to have slightly expanded. Then where was the pyrogen? It was within the flesh and bones. Yet it was outside of the usual functions? This was a bit like an extraordinary power. If he were to use configuration theory to explain it. Luonan's mind suddenly went blank for a moment. When he came back to his senses, his thinking pattern and range naturally expanded. He added the element of configuration analysis. He looked at Jerry again. The feeling was completely different from a few seconds ago. The little fellow had transformed from an individual that could be perceived normally into a complex living system. This system possessed a basic mechanism that could guarantee the growth and circulation of life. At the same time, various organizational components were embedded within the logic of a higher-level configuration system. At the very least, there was an intermittent connection. A lot of information flashed through Luonan's mind in an instant, but it was very hard to make it clear. Right now, All that was left in his perception was Jerry's body structure, including his flesh and blood, skin and hair, internal organs and bones, those seemingly right but not quite right details. Just like his previous design in the saltwater lake in the wilderness, there seemed to be no connection at all, but on a higher level, a magical structure was built. Jerry's throat made a goo-goo sound, and he was in a dumbfounded state. The more Luonan looked at it, the clearer it became. Under normal circumstances, this sort of structure would not appear. However, under this extreme state of extreme heat, all sorts of minute changes piled up together to form a blurry yet vaguely conforming picture. Why is it blurry? Why does it seem so? Was it innate, or was it modified after birth? Luonan's fingertips streaked down from the back of Jerry's head, following along the joints of Jerry's spine. Luonan's train of thought gradually became clear. Perhaps, it was a problem of growth and development. After all, the cells of a living body changed at an extremely fast rate. Wasn't there a saying, every person is a completely different person from their childhood self? Skin, blood, muscles, and even every cell in the body will undergo a complete renewal at a different frequency. Practically not a single cell in an adult's body was left over from childhood. Humans were like this, and muskrats were the same. Because of this, Luonan paid more attention to the nerve cells in the brain and spinal cord. After all, they had the longest lifespans. They were practically unaffected by the changes in growth and development, and they were the most able to embody the main train of thought of this special structure. As his thoughts converged, the distributed image of Jerry's nervous system was mapped into Luonan's mind. Luonan was limited by the precision of his senses and the level of his clairvoyance. This sort of scan was not completely accurate, but Luonan was able to grasp the familiar structure within just by looking at the distribution of fragments. Luonan didn't know why he laughed out loud. In fact, right now he was a complete contradiction. His train of thought was clear, but his emotions were even more chaotic. His mental senses steadily deepened, but his hands on Jerry's body were trembling. His control over his strength had problems. What did this sort of test result mean? What did it mean? Jerry suddenly screeched loudly. Luonan had strangled him to the point of pain. Luonan came back to his senses and hurriedly withdrew his strength. He fiercely blew a few mouthfuls of air at Jerry, who was about to be strangled to death. Then he placed the little fellow upright on the table. The little fellow looked at him stupidly. Luonan managed to control his emotions with great difficulty. He stooped down until his face was practically touching Jerry's. Be good, Jerry. Uncle will help you. Help you sort out a bit. Goo. Yes. You're the one helping me. Help me. Luonan subconsciously used an imperative sentence. The little fellow might not be able to understand, but he was infected by the atmosphere and became abnormally obedient and quiet. Luonan took another deep breath and gripped Jerry's body once more. At the same time, his god gear and body gear coupled and interfered. The material plane and the mental plane blended together, forming a slight fluctuation that permeated into Jerry's flesh and blood. Correspondingly, the disjointed configuration elements appeared in front of him one after another. Since Luonan had already probed down to the level of the nervous system, he was able to roughly understand the train of thought of the original remodeler. Luonan's half-year of high-intensity configuration theory and practical study provided him with a large number of feasible plans. Luonan's hand gently caressed Jerry's body, and the little fellow's throat let out a gurgling sound. He had a rather comfortable appearance. He was completely unaware of the earth-shattering changes that were happening to his own body on a certain level. Luonan's hand was still shaking at this time. He was unable to control it no matter what. And it was the same on the mental plane. He had no choice but to slow down as much as possible. But the more he did this, the more his overly active mind advanced. He had already predicted the final result halfway through the combing process. Every subsequent change was just a practical verification. Jerry was muddled, and Luonan stared intently into its eyes. The little fellow's eyesight was terrible, but it was very comfortable right now. Its eyes were squinted into slits. But as the combing and remodeling process progressed, a layer of marvelous radiance clearly converged between the pupils of Luonan's squinted eyes. This was the luster of life energy, and it represented a string of deeply hidden information. The blurry configuration picture became clear and definite under Luo Nan's adjustments. Luo Nan held Jerry in his arms once again without hesitation. He adjusted the direction, letting Jerry look directly at the virtual work area that had always interested him. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Luo Nan's heart beat more than 30 times in these 3 seconds. The little fellow seemed to feel his urgent mood, and it let out a light cry. Its dazed eyes clearly emitted a tangible radiance that struck the virtual work area in front of it. A marvelous structure expanded from here on out. The external neuron hidden deep within Luo Nan's brain spontaneously emitted a brilliant electric flame. Luo Nan's heart contracted and expanded, and his mind unconsciously became a field of blankness. By the time he came back to his senses, the projected area had already returned to the initial interface of the flexible e-ink screen for some unknown reason. Luo Nan's attention was projected, and the drawing software that had always existed within opened up once more, presenting a blank page. It was as if an invisible hand had painted concise lines on the surface a second later, gradually presenting a brand new interface. Luo Nan was familiar with this sort of situation. The initial design drafts were always like this. Of course, many people were used to using ready-made materials to stitch together. Hand painting was very old-fashioned. Luo Nan's eyes unconsciously widened as the interface gradually took shape. This interface felt very familiar, yet it was also very strange. He was familiar with the form of the interface. It had an extremely simple and even crude style. There were only 2 options juxtaposed together. Many UI interfaces were like this. Luo Nan had come into contact with one recently. It was the credit evaluation system of the Vagrant Exchange. It was practically the same. However, the words were different. The words used on the hand-drawn interface were the structure and grammar of hieroglyphics, but they were specious. Normal people certainly wouldn't be able to understand them, even if they had been influenced by the East Asian culture for many years. Luo Nan was able to get a general idea because he had been dealing with it recently. These were the words of the virtual brain system. They came from an unknown civilization. Actually, Luo Nan had never learned these words, but the mysterious I-character structure that became the core of the formatting theory system was like a translation device. It directly mapped the general meaning into his mind. For example, the current interface presented a sequence of options. The first one meant, click on me if you understand it. The next one meant, it's okay if you don't understand it. This was no doubt a tease, but Luo Nan couldn't laugh. He stared blankly for quite a while. Finally, he reached out and pressed on the first option. The interface, which felt more like a simple design blueprint, actually had an interactive function. The interface immediately changed, switching to a blank page and writing anew. The series of strokes were quite fluent. The fellow who drew the interface should have already grasped this type of language quite well. This string of words belonged to an unknown civilization. It was like the subject of a slide. It was arranged in a relatively large font, occupying the entire interface. If Luo Nan's understanding and translation were correct, then the meaning of the words was General Education Level Test Simulation System. There was also a line of smaller font below. Chapter 773. Luo Nan was stupefied as he looked at the simple text interface. The large characters on top were fine, but the small characters below were completely incomprehensible. 100-year sequence? What the hell? The external neuron continued to radiate electricity within his brain, showing that it was still in operation. Luo Nan originally believed that the external neuron, which had developed the virtual brain system, had basically exhausted its deep mysteries. But now he discovered that there was clearly a different kind of information hidden at the bottom, and it was being gradually loaded right now. The process of forming the hand-drawn interface was actually the process of loading. 3 seconds later, the words General Education faded away and was replaced by the same hand-drawn, draft-style interface. It was still in a minimalist mode, but the options were a bit more complicated. What appeared in order were the 4 choice categories of culture, society, skills, and true teachings. Luo Nan tried to look at the items under each category before the interface was completely formed. However, the three categories of culture, society, skills, and true teachings were completely non-selectable states. At first, Luo Nan believed that it was because the interface hadn't finished loading yet. But when the interface was completely drawn and he tried them one by one, he confirmed that he could only select the true teachings category and nothing more. There were a total of 5 options on the True Teachings category's second-level menu. If Luo Nan's identification was correct, they were probably internal cultivation, truth-reaching, creation, technique deployment, and configuration. Some of these words were familiar, some were unfamiliar, but they were all brimming with the meaning of extraordinary cultivation. However, only the configuration category was an optional state. There was only one choice and Luo Nan only chose that one. He clicked once more, and the interface that refreshed this time was no longer in hand-drawn mode. Instead, it was an extremely complex three-dimensional diagram. It clearly belonged to the domain of the configuration system, but it was only a relatively simple static structure. There were also questions and options on the side of the diagram. This was a freaking multiple-choice question. Please select a basic configuration that is not suitable to be added to the main diagram design. The options were 4 sets of simple configuration diagrams. Ha! Luo Nan laughed involuntarily, but his breath didn't have a hint of happiness. There was only absurdity and resentment. Test me. You test me. You have the face to test me. At this moment, Luo Nan no longer understood who was the one who had set up these mysterious arrangements. His brain had grown for 16 years in vain. He suddenly stood up, his entire body tensed up, to the point that Jerry let out another muffled cry. The little guy's glowing eyes had already deviated from the virtual workspace, but at this time, the hidden database in the external neuron had already been loaded. It didn't matter whether or not the little guy's gaze shone on him. Luo Nan loosened his grip and let the little fellow jump down. This was to prevent Luo Nan from strangling him to death in his excitement. After freeing his hands, he had nowhere to put them. He spun around and finally raised his arms, wanting to grab the non-existent figure in the tree hole where light and shadow intertwined. What kind of lousy joke is this? Luo Nan's muffled roar shook the tree hollow with a buzzing sound, but no one answered him. Jerry had never seen such an uncle before. He shrank in the corner, not daring to show his head. According to the adaptive function, the virtual workspace embedded in the curved tree wall displayed the so-called proficiency test interface. It remained the same. No, that wasn't right either. A blood-red countdown interface suddenly popped up under Luo Nan's manic gaze. There were also corresponding words. No response actions detected. Do you want to give up on this mock exam? It has been detected that the examinee is not suited to the difficulty of the question bank. The version will revert to the popular version. There was still a countdown. It wasn't just in the center of the interface that was conspicuous. There was clearly a countdown for the entire set of questions in the upper left corner of the interface. The basic unit of time in the unknown civilization, if converted to seconds, would be approximately 5 seconds. Luo Nan had looked at the database for a long time, so he could barely recognize these professional symbols like numbers. The total countdown in the upper left corner, when converted to Earth time, was approximately an hour. As for the current countdown timer on the interface, looking at the blood-red characters, it was already the second to last character. It would reach 0 in approximately 10 seconds. Even though Luo Nan didn't understand the difference between the verified version and the popular version, and he didn't understand what bullshit the 100-year sequence was, he knew that he couldn't continue being willful under these restrictions. The only thing in front of him was a rigid system, not a living person. He rushed forward with large strides and clicked on the second option before the final flash of the blood-red countdown timer. The exam simulation system calmly flipped the page. The previous blood-red warning was completely erased, revealing the next question. It was another multiple-choice question with drag difficulty. You want to use this to stump me? Reality proved that just looking at the previous foundational questions and making light conclusions was incorrect. Luo Nan's emotions were in turmoil, and he wasn't in his best state. But he could feel that many of the questions were quite difficult as he worked through them. Some of them were questions he had never touched before. He could only make hasty judgments due to the time limit. He half gave up and half passed them. Luonan didn't know what the passing score for this test was. It was fine if he missed 1 or 2 questions, but he skipped a lot towards the end. His mind gradually grew nervous. He didn't know if he would be able to pass in the end. The test time was approximately an hour, but Luonan spent less than 40 minutes to complete it. The reason for this was because the last question was a configuration design. It required the construction of a space module. It required the construction of a miniature spatial fault, and the like on the basis of the local space and time. This was the main direction that Luonan had been researching for the past half-year. Luonan's research had even gone a step further. He had practically created it out of thin air without any foundation to rely on. In comparison, the spatial volume and environmental conditions required for this question were very low. It only required the storage of approximately 1 cubic meter of inanimate objects, and the duration was under 5 minutes. Rather than calling it a space module, it would be better to call it a space bubble. This was the most difficult question at the end. The testing system had set aside approximately half the time for this question. Luonan only used 2 minutes to complete this question in addition to the consumption of examining the question and puzzling over it. The unconventional setting of easy, hard, easy caused Luonan to come to a realization. It seems like I'm quite partial to a subject. Tests were forever a good method for self-analysis. No matter how emotional Luonan was, he was still able to grasp some key information from within. During the course of the test, he was very weak when it came to the application of configurations in the life sciences of unknown civilizations, the material sciences, and even basic general knowledge. However, he had an extremely clear advantage when it came to the simulation of space and time structures, restoration, construction, and other high-end contents. Such a knowledge structure was undoubtedly tempered out from the misty maze and the notes and materials his mother had left behind. In any case, the test ended and Luonan pressed the submit option. The results were about to come out. What would come next? People would always place extra expectations on matters that required them to expend their energy. Luonan was no exception. He urgently wanted to know the following changes. He pressed his hands against the tabletop and suppressed his surging emotions. He stared fixedly at the interface, his eyes not even blinking. But the entire interface was suddenly cleared clean 2 seconds later. All that was left was a blank area. Not the slightest trace was left behind. Hey! Luonan instinctively reached out his hand to touch it. His fingers streaked across the projected area, bringing forth chaotic ripples. And at this time, a brand new handwriting appeared. Moreover, it had already been replaced with the words that Luonan was familiar with since childhood. Luonan's finger retracted as if it had been scorched by fire, making way for the trajectory of the words to appear. He took another step back to expand his field of vision, allowing him to see the meaning of the words more clearly. Pass. You're as smart as I thought you were. 2 exclamation marks were poked there. There was clearly an emotion that soared between the lines of the words. Luonan's body was still stiff, but his consciousness was already drifting absent-mindedly. He didn't know how to react. He watched dumbly as the words disappeared and new content appeared. Are you 20 years old right now? 30 years old? Are you married? Do you have children? Is the Earth still in a free state? Or have you already faced the starry sky and entered the 100-year sequence? In any case, being able to find this hidden piece of information amidst a series of coincidences was quite a feat. As a father, I hope that you have read this information in your leisure time while reminiscing about the past. I hope that you have occasionally patched up this missing link while admiring my Messiah-like grandeur. But if you are still a person tangled in pain right now, harboring a loathing for me in your heart, you are struggling amidst the confusing clues, then I ask you to forgive my incompetence. In the end, I wasn't able to realize my predetermined plan. Perhaps I have already foolishly died in forbearance and concealment. It is impossible for me to shine glory into your life. The corner of Luonan's mouth twitched slightly. There was a lot of information that he didn't understand, but he didn't have the slightest intention of probing it. He needed to control his surging emotions, to control his heart that was about to explode. He had already exhausted all of his strength. The words continued to appear. I don't have anything else to help you with. I can only show you the path I once walked, the process of me searching for the answer. Though the path is dark and rugged, I know that your mother's soul has always been there. She lent me her talent and wisdom to pave the long road that leads to the ultimate answer within the labyrinth of nothingness. However, my slow-witted self has wasted far too much time in the end. Li Wei, remember this name. This unwelcome guest from beyond the heavens has already arrived. I can only hastily sever this smooth road and welcome an unknown fate. Here I write. I only hope that you will like this present. Happy birthday. The signature was Luo Zhongheng. The date was June 18, 2090. Luo Nen was nailed in place like a stake. He looked at the signature all the way until the interface and the words disappeared. Then a new scene appeared. It was a double helix structure similar to DNA. However, the nodes on it weren't some ATCG. Instead, they were miniature hand-drawn sketches. They seemed to be divided into two routes that intertwined and influenced each other. Luo Nen didn't have the heart to look at the specifics. He stood there in a daze until his frantic heartbeat and surging blood made his entire body numb. Only then did he make a move. He subconsciously raised his hand and brought up the perpetual calendar. He found June 18, 2090. His birthday was June 16. Then was this 2 days later? Was it here? It was only a few dozen kilometers away from where he was at the time. Luo Nen took a deep breath. He wanted to go forward and bring up those messages from before. But just as he took a step, his knees inexplicably went soft. He staggered and even bumped into the stool under the table. He was in such a sorry state. Luo Nen lowered his head and bent his body. He pressed down on the stool and suddenly laughed hoarsely. Is this a whitewash? Luo Zhongheng, you want to whitewash my father? All right, I'll give you a chance. Come out. Come out right now. I can think about it. I can try to forgive you. This is the chance. Come out. Come out. Chapter 774. It's late at night in Ban City. The clouds were still eternally bright, and the originally cloudy environment became even more restless and uneasy because of the sun hanging high in the sky. Snake Tongue floated in the air, her spirit body becoming increasingly illusory and unreal. Sometimes, a gust of wind blew, and her figure seemed to fluctuate and disperse, as if she could transform into the clouds at any time. Gongqi was at Snake Tongue's side, listening to the strange collapsing sounds that came from the depths of the surging cold currents of clouds. After a moment he smiled faintly and said, The clouds and the sun seem to be in harmony, but in fact, they are far from being separated. It's like this on Earth, and it's even worse here. Two originally unrelated spacetime, for some reason, are continuously interfering and colliding. This is actually a great help to us. Snake Tongue was silent, but the collapsing sounds were becoming increasingly clear. This is the fluctuation transmitted by spacetime interference. Good, very good. Gongqi's spirit body seemed solid, no different from an ordinary person. At this moment, he stretched out his hand and gently plucked at the clouds, intersecting with the vibrations deep in the air. Under the interference collision, the originally hidden and restrained structure of spacetime is revealed. It is necessary to use this to observe and explore. If we can capture traces of the spacetime Earth is enduring this time, we can wait until the intensity of the interference collision reaches a certain level. The spacetime structure will change, and the shackles will loosen. That will be a great opportunity to escape. Escape how? Snake Tongue's thoughts were finally transmitted. They were faint and weak, but they carried an undisguised mocking tone. So what if it was really as Gongqi said? She hadn't forgotten the silk of silence that covered the outer layer of her spirit body. In the past half a year, this strange item had taken advantage of her weakening day by day to continuously penetrate deep into her spirit body, gathering information and attempting to interfere and control her. If it wasn't for the jade-shattering secret technique that Gongqi was worried about losing everything, perhaps she would have long since been reduced to an artifact spirit. Her life would be worse than death. Even if she truly escaped and returned to the local space-time of Earth, she would still be Gongqi's captive, and Gongqi would have thousands of methods to deal with her. Her fate would only be more miserable than it was now. Gongqi was well aware of Snake Tongue's attitude and thoughts, but he didn't care in the slightest. He was even a bit more amiable than usual. You have to use your heart. This kind of space-time interference information is a good opportunity that you can't encounter on Earth. It will be beneficial to your future cultivation. Snake Tongue coldly retorted, Secretary General Gong is proficient in spatial teleportation and has a deep understanding of the structure of space-time. I can't compare to such a foundation and knowledge. Not to mention, my life force is currently dissipating. I can't afford to waste this mental energy. Gongqi laughed involuntarily. Not really, not really. As the saying goes, there's light at the end of the tunnel, survival in a desperate situation. These words are designed for you and me. This is a rare opportunity. Calm down and carefully experience it. With a buzzing sound, Gongqi's figure disappeared. No one knew where he went. Snake Tongue didn't react in the slightest. However, her spiritual body continued to fluctuate within the surging clouds. Her mind also spread out as it swayed, dispersing into the nothingness. She was used to this state. It was as if she was experiencing a long dream. So much so that she could hardly tell the difference between reality and dreams. Her soul had been cleaved into two halves. One half was above the despairing and lonely clouds. Her life force weakened with each passing day. Her mind was muddled every day, and she had to endure Gongqi's oppression. Every day, she was like a wisp of a remnant soul without any prospects to speak of. She couldn't see any driving force of life. The other half returned to Sakura City. In the hidden environment that she was most proud of, she fused with the fake yet real Kitayama Yuki. She played the role of a retreating artist who was kept as a mistress by a powerful figure in society. This period of her life was much richer. She could walk, sit, and lie like a normal person. She could realize a complete daily routine. She could even go out for a stroll. Shopping wasn't a problem, including online shopping. She could greet and chat with the housewives of the high-class residential district. In the past, this was a boring matter that she couldn't be bothered to deal with. Now she had a special interest in doing it. Even if those foolish housewives misunderstood her as a despicable person who had lost her financial backer, it didn't matter. In this period of her life, she understood the value of life more than any other time. However, she could only live like a normal person. As long as she had any plans or inclinations that involved the inner world or supernatural powers, she would immediately lose all control over herself. She would once again become a weak spirit, drifting in the sky above Sakura City. She could only watch helplessly as her fleshly body returned to the state of a walking corpse, unable to do anything. After a few foolish attempts, Snake Tongue understood. An invisible hand was manipulating everything she experienced. It was wantonly toying with her will. Suddenly, it was heaven, suddenly it was earth, suddenly it was life, and suddenly it was death. It was impossible for her to resist. However, if Snake Tongue was given a chance to choose between the clouds and Sakura City, she would choose the latter without the slightest hesitation. She would choose the latter without the slightest hesitation. Even if the essence of it was that the invisible hand was no different from Gongqi's plans. And it was very likely that it would turn her into a caged canary that could decide her life and death with a single thought, causing her to completely lose the freedom of her body and soul. However, at the very least, she saw a glimmer of hope for survival. In that brief state of spirit and body as one, wisps of vitality, weak but life-threatening energy, came from a channel she couldn't understand and poured into her nearly dried-up spirit body. Her spirit body was on the verge of collapse, replenishing a tiny bit of vitality and extending her life. As for Gongqi, who was also trapped in the clouds, he only wanted to refine her into the yarn of silence. Snake Tongue already couldn't see too far ahead. She only knew that she could still live. She had to live. Just this one condition was enough. And because of this, she had to conceal this secret. I can't let Gongqi know. This was the iron law Snake Tongue had set for herself. She was extremely weak and had long since lost the qualifications to benefit from both sides. In fact, even if she was at her peak, she still wouldn't have the qualifications to face two supernatural powers. Yes, that's right. The person who could penetrate the barrier of space and time and control her life or death was undoubtedly a super powerhouse. She could only entrust her fate to one side. This was a single-choice question, a question of life and death. This absolutely wasn't an easy matter. The Yarn of Silence was constantly spying on the state of her spirit body. No matter where Gongqi was, he could use this strange item to probe Snaketongue's specific state. Snaketongue could only think of every method possible to conceal the traces of the changes brought about by the split-soul dreamland. As for everything else, she would leave it to the heavens to decide. Time should be almost up. The pattern of these dreams was quite strong. They were more or less in accordance with a normal person's daily routine. From morning to nightfall, there would be at least one dream a day. The last time was 20 hours ago. Now that dawn was approaching, perhaps the summoning would come soon. Soon. Cold air whooshed past. The fine sound of bowstrings being drawn rose and fell. Time flowed on like this. 1 hour, 2 hours, 5 hours, 10 hours, and even another 20 hours passed. There was no sign of the expected summoning. Chapter 775. Why? Could it be that this is really a dream? As time passed, the throbbing of her mind became increasingly difficult to control. The conjurer's accurate grasp of time instead turned into the sound of blood flowing after a cut wrist. Drop by drop, it fell into the lake of her heart, allowing the ripples of death to ripple. Snaketongue floated woodenly in the clouds. The vitality and vital energy she had expected were nowhere to be found. The core of her spirit body, which had just recovered, had a clear feeling of weakness. This was like a tired long-distance runner whose physical strength was exhausted. If they kept running half-dead, they might be able to persevere by relying on the power of habit. But once they rested for a moment and let go of their energy, it would be very difficult to pull themselves together again. Snaketongue was in such a situation now. She was relying more and more on this vital energy to support her. She could no longer imagine what would happen if she lost this vital energy and this hope again. Stupid, I am too stupid. I should have expressed my attitude to that person in time. I actually wasted such a good opportunity on meaningless probing. If I miss the opportunity, perhaps I will completely miss it. Countless thoughts were born and extinguished in Snaketongue's mind. Each one seemed to be able to transform into a viper, biting at her will and injecting venom. If there was another chance, Snaketongue swore that she would not hesitate to beg that powerhouse for mercy, even if she had to beg like a dog. But would there really be another chance? High in the sky, the wind whistled and blew. Her spirit body flashed and extinguished. It could scatter into the clouds at any time, almost out of shape. Snaketongue's mind gradually fell into a trance. The thread of clarity and decisiveness that she had always maintained for half a year seemed to be melting away. As a result, the veil of silence that had always covered her spirit body immediately reacted. This seemingly formless strange object suddenly tightened and seeped down layer by layer. Snaketongue awoke in horror. She wanted to summon her remaining strength to struggle, but she had already missed the best opportunity. The defensive dam silently collapsed. The veil of silence's pressure penetrated and scattered her vital energy. It intertwined and fused with her spirit body, becoming one. In an instant, everything had reached a point of no return. Snaketongue was still desperately trying to reorganize her defensive line to protect the core structure of her spirit body. But this was only a desperate struggle. With her reorganizing speed, she could not keep up with the powerful erosion of the veil of silence. Even the preset jade-shattering secret technique was delayed and wavering. Then time seemed to have paused for a moment. At the very least, the process of the veil of silence's infiltration had paused for a moment. It was this slight difference that made Snaketongue's desperate efforts truly worth it. She promptly reorganized her defensive line. Even though she was still in a precarious situation, she was still able to block the seeping pressure of the silent yarn outside the core structure of her spirit body. A faint sizzling sound rang out. Because of the loss of control from before, at least a tenth of the Snaketongue spirit's body had been vaporized and shattered. It shrunk in size and became even more hazy. However, compared to the fate of becoming an artifact spirit puppet, it was still much better. That was close. The heavens didn't give up on me. No, if I really had the protection of the gods, how could I have fallen to such a state? There's a problem, a big problem. After walking the line between life and death and returning, Snake Tongue's rational core gradually appeared amidst her frightened and despairing emotions. She saw through the details that shouldn't have appeared in the situation where she had almost fallen into the abyss. The veil of silence should have been able to completely refine her. So how could something have gone wrong at the last moment? That was because he still couldn't hide it. With a single thought, she connected all the previous links one after another, forming a logical chain that was gradually becoming complete. At first, Snake Tongue pondered, but then she suddenly began to chuckle. The sound of her laughter became louder and louder, shaking the sky and striking the clouds. It spread far and wide. At this point, the fluke heart hidden in despair and hope vanished into thin air. However, a new thought sprouted, and a large number of roots and branches sprouted, supporting the frail spirit body and channeling new power. What's wrong? My mind is in turmoil. In the midst of Snake Tongue's unbridled laughter, a thought suddenly cut in. The clouds in front of her rolled and soared, and the structure of the void hummed and shook. A second later, Gong Qi's face appeared in the collapsing clouds. His ice-cold willpower pulled out a little more, and the power of an extraordinary would be able to sweep Snake Tongue's frail spirit body into ashes. However, Snake Tongue didn't pay him any attention. Her laughter didn't stop, and she was very happy. Gong Qi's face was calm, as if he had just moved back from afar and didn't know what had just happened. He didn't seem to mind that he had just missed a good opportunity to collect Snake Tongue. Nor did he care about her current extremely rude attitude. He only spoke neither quickly nor slowly. When encountering a major event, one must remain calm, especially when hope is in front. In this way, there was almost no difference from 20 hours ago. But now Snake Tongue heard more meaning. Snake Tongue floated up and laughed in response. I've been trapped here for half a year, but this is the first time I feel that Secretary General Gong truly cares about me and doesn't want me to vanish into thin air. Oh, now you don't even want to be restrained by the veil of silence. About this. When did Secretary General Gong discover this? Which? Gong Qi still wanted to feign ignorance, or perhaps he didn't want to make things clear and cause more trouble. But how could Snake Tongue do as he wished? The outline of Snake Tongue's nearly shapeless spirit body pressed back against her chest. Of course it's the one Secretary General Gong cares about the most. The matter is clearly laid out there. You're a senior with a high position. What's the point of going back and forth like this and that? Their gazes and wills crisscrossed and collided. Although there was a difference in strength, in terms of willpower, Snake Tongue didn't fall into a disadvantageous position for a short time. This was a situation that had never occurred since the two of them had come into contact, but it still happened. One wrong step, and every step was wrong. But he had no choice but to make a mistake. Gong Qi muttered to himself for a moment, and finally nodded. That's right, there's nothing to hide. Snake Tongue, I'm very interested in the life force accumulated at the core of your spirit body. The channel through which it came. As expected, Snake Tongue laughed silently. Because of the life force transmitted through the unity of spirit and body, it would inevitably change the spirit body's natural weakening trend. Sooner or later, it would accumulate to the point that Gong Qi couldn't ignore it. This day would come sooner or later. Snake Tongue had tried to conceal it, but she only hoped to escape this cloud prison before Gong Qi sensed it. Unfortunately, in the end, she hadn't made it in time. Gong Qi, this old bastard, naturally didn't slow down because he cherished Snake Tongue's life. Instead, he had misgivings. He had misgivings about the fleeting channel that was connected to her spirit body. Clearly, the words he had said before about the collision of spacetime and the loosening of the structure were too much of an exaggeration. Gong Qi didn't have the confidence. At the very least, this old bastard didn't have the confidence to return to Earth after escaping this world. So Gong Qi specifically mentioned the traces of the spacetime Earth was in. In this old bastard's calculations, she was a kite. A kite with a string on the other side of Earth. No matter what, the string couldn't be broken. But was the string really still there? What was the plan of the powerful being who was far away on Earth? The one who dominated her life and hope. Inla quietly walked into the living area on the lower deck of the yacht. Right now, the lighting in the small living room had already been dimmed. Only the radiance of the projection diffused. Luonan sat on the sofa in the small living room. He was like a sculpture. Occasionally, he would move his fingers, change angles, and switch images. He quietly examined the complex structure that could dazzle people. Inla didn't dare to disturb him. She just waited at the entrance. Ever since Luonan returned to Xia City, Inli's sharp senses told her that Luonan was a bit different from before when they met again. On the surface, this man seemed to have obtained a complex design from who knows where. It was similar to the double helix structure of DNA, and every node on it was a complex design diagram. After Luonan returned, he stared at it in a daze. Sometimes his brows furrowed. Sometimes he would suddenly laugh. His moods were unpredictable. But Inla clearly felt that there was a wonderful core within this chaotic state of mind. Especially when he was contemplating. He was truly contemplating. He wasn't thinking like he was facing a big exam. He was racking his brains in a competition. He was more like a philosopher. His thoughts were condensed but not rigid. His thoughts were scattered but not chaotic. His rhythm was much more relaxed. This kind of Luonan's behavior pattern was increasingly hard to predict. What happened in the few hours he spent returning to Xia City yesterday? Looking at the current situation, it didn't seem to be too bad. Inla really wanted to get to the bottom of this, but as Luonan's personal secretary, she needed to keep her duties. She could only restrain her curiosity and wait in silence until Luonan's observation came to an end. What happened? Luonan didn't turn off the light in the work area. He just tilted his head to ask. Inla walked to the side of the sofa. She bowed and answered. Miss Moya took a cruise ship. It arrived at the port at 4 in the afternoon. The person in charge of receiving her was a member of the Banqing Music Festival's organizing committee. Luonan should be able to obtain more detailed information about this from Xia City. Inla just skimmed over it. She just said the information she obtained through the Bloodflame Orders channels. Miss Moya's fan club is being held at a cultural center near the hotel she's staying at. The scale isn't large. There are about 150 people present. But at the same time the fan club is being held, Yukawa Isuk, the sponsor you reminded us to pay attention to, will be going to inspect the cultural center. The cultural center is the property of Yukawa's family. Luonan's lips twitched. What a coincidence. He took the flexible screen Inlo handed over as he spoke, and looked at the relevant information. According to what was shown, Yukawa Isuk wasn't an ability user. But his family had an illustrious reputation in Banqing. They had strong influence in both the military and the political world. They were also very active project investors. They had invested funds in many frontier projects. They could be considered a very standard investor. And then there was Appraiser Jade Association. Luonan caught this word he had heard before from Yukawa Isuk's long list of titles. Inli's intelligence work could be considered solid. She even added a link to this specific organization. Luonan opened it and sized it up a few times. He paid particular attention to the numerous names and their corresponding backgrounds. He suddenly laughed when he was done. Chapter 776. Sister Cat, Mother Cat. Oh no, Granny Cat. For the sake of our friendship, please help me. Zongyu's pleading voice was transmitted through electromagnetic waves, passing through thousands of miles of ocean waves to reach Cat Eye's ears. This guy, who had always been thick-skinned, had completely thrown his face into the mud just to beg for an opportunity. I know this is a disgrace. I know this isn't right. I know I'm not qualified, but I'm the only member in Xia City. What can I do when this disgrace falls on my head? Zongyu repeated these words over and over again. My request isn't high. I just hope that Mr. Luo can give me a clear answer regarding the invitation. Of course, if I am fortunate enough to travel together with him, then it would be the fortune of 8 generations of my ancestors. How will your father react when he hears this? Even if he lashes me 100 times, he can't take the life of his own son. The Jade Review Conference can take your life? Aren't you a big shot who can talk to Wang Yu? Sister Cat. Sister Cat. Just treat my words as farts. Others may not know what kind of moral character I am, but I can't hide it from you. Yes, they can't take my life, but they can hold down my loans. I'll jump into the sea if the funds for my investments run out. Hee hee, that's a pretty good way to die. Cat Eyes had just walked into the lobby of the hotel. She saw Tang Yi already sitting in the corner of the sofa and greeted her. Tang Yi responded with a smile, and immediately got up to greet her. Sister Cat. Zhong Yu's mournful wails became even more miserable. Cat Eyes was disinclined to speak with him any further. Where are you? Acumen College. It's right here at Gear on the north coast. Sister Cat, I knew you would help me. Thank you. Thank you. As long as Mr. Luo is willing. You see that little forest behind Gear? Half a year ago, a fellow named Tank died there. His internal organs ruptured and his flesh turned to mush. Ha. If this isn't enough, there's another fellow named Jin Tong. He's in the sea outside Xia City. Not even his bones remain. If you jump down there, you might be able to find him as a companion. Sister Mao, don't scare me. Hee hee, I'm just reminding you that your father can whip you, the Jade Inspection Association can take your loan, and that person can take your life if he's in a bad mood. For the sake of our friendship, I'll give these words to you for free. You're welcome. Cat Eyes hung up the phone. She frowned slightly. Actually, she was a bit baffled. That shameless bastard Zonggong was nowhere to be found. This proved that Luo Nen really wasn't at Gear on the North Bank. That guy had been hiding for almost a week. Where did he go? It wasn't to the extent of completely cutting off contact with the outside world. Could it be that he ran to another city like a few days ago? Then the most likely place for him to go now should be, at this moment. Tang Yi walked to her side and laughed in spite of herself. Overbearing. Yes. Cat Eyes understood that Tang Yi wasn't referring to her attitude. Instead, she was referring to the powerful power that the Jade Review Association represented. That group of people had always been arrogant and proficient in trickery. They loved to scheme against people's hearts. Right now, Zonggong, a minor character with a complicated and subtle relationship, was thrown out in order to provoke Luo Nan. It would be best to provoke Luo Nan into doing something. Then they would suppress Luo Nan and grind down his spirit. This was an overt plot that was thrown right in Luo Nan's face. Clearly, this group of people were confident that they had Luo Nan's life in their grasp. They were too lazy to conceal anything. Of course, this was also part of the effect of the plot. Luo Nan pretended not to see. Temporarily avoiding them was the right thing to do. He avoided them. Oh, that's right. You can't hold too much hope. Tang Yi laughed involuntarily. She reached out to grab Cat Eyes by the shoulder and walked out of the hotel. Let's go. I'll pay for all of today's expenses. Treat it as thanks in place of Amoya. Today was the third day after arriving in Ban City. Early in the morning, Amoya, Wild Jujube, and Gauda went to the cultural center across the street to rehearse. She was an intelligent woman. She had interacted with Cat Eyes and the others many times during her 5 days on the cruise. She had already understood her own circumstances. She had just properly relaxed on the cruise. After arriving in Ban City, she had lived in seclusion. Every day, she would only travel between the hotel and the cultural center. This gave the security personnel quite a bit of convenience. As for Cat Eyes and Tang Yi, their mission today was to patrol the surrounding environment, formulate a revised route of retreat, and so on. The two were like best friends going shopping side by side. Tang Yi was taller than Cat Eyes by an entire head. She was used to wearing short hunting clothes, long pants, and brown boots. Her long legs were a complete mess of handsomeness. Even though she was younger than Cat Eyes by 6 or 7 years, her words and actions were calm and unruffled. It was hard to tell her exact age. Cat Eyes was out in the field. Her refreshing attire had the effect of reducing her age. The two walked side by side on the street. It was hard to tell who was the older sister and who was the younger sister. In any case, they were both pleasing to the eye. Cat Eyes really wasn't used to having her shoulders held by others, but Tang Yi was quite familiar with it. She chuckled and said, "If it weren't for that group of people, Emoya would be by my side in an ideal situation." "You put your arms around Emoya's shoulders too? It's fine if we just hold hands." "Your relationship with her is pretty good." "Yeah. We've gotten to know each other ever since Emoya came to Acumen College. I was muddle-headed for many years before that. It's only in recent years that I've been happier. Emoya is a very free and easy person. Only in this way can she live in the rock underground, and in our complicated circle. She's not aloof and pretentious, and she doesn't go with the flow. She's still someone that people can't help but like." Cat Eyes wanted to ask if Tang Yi had the guts to tell Luo Nan about the intimate relationship between the two of them. Basically, Cat Eyes was the type of person who respected privacy. Her impression of Tang Yi was pretty good. However, the relationship between her and Luo Nan was extraordinary. Even if she wanted to keep it a secret, sometimes her body and mind were not in control of themselves. A myriad of thoughts ultimately turned into a single sentence. "You're also quite free and easy. Let's go and welcome the future like this." Tang Yi laughed heartily. Though she did not drink, she had the willful and unrestrained nature of being drunk. She was exceptionally eye-catching on the streets of Ban City. Cat Eyes rolled her eyes and Tang Yi suddenly turned her head from the other side. Cat Eyes was a hair too late to react. She turned her gaze as well. At the end of her line of sight was the cultural center, where Emoya resided. It wasn't large in scale, and it wasn't a standalone building. It just stood at the corner of the street. It had the intention of being quiet amidst the hustle and bustle. It was very unremarkable. However, there was a familiar figure in a small open-air tea house at the corner of the street. He raised a cup at them with a smile. "Oh, you've met an old friend in a foreign land. Don't you want to drink a cup or two?" Cat Eyes looked at the person in the tea house. His face was dark, and he wore a long khaki windbreaker. He wore a white t-shirt and a pair of ankle boots. He sat there like a big star, radiating light in all directions. But for some unknown reason, she could see the effect of a plain and cold white coat when she looked at his attire. Chapter 777. Cat Eyes, long time no see. Her red lips curled up beneath her sunglasses. Bai Xinyan calmly replied to Cat Eyes. They were both ability users of the world circle of Xia City. Of course, the two of them knew each other, but their friendship was superficial. However, the way Bai Xinyan treated the other person was completely different. She even put down her cup, smiled, stood up, and opened her arms. "Don't you want a hug, Peony?" The corners of Tang Yi's lips curled up, and she stepped forward to give Bai Xinyan a hug. In the East Asian cultural circle, this was already a relatively intimate action. Cat Eyes was quite surprised. "You two know each other?" More than half a year ago, Tang Yi had not officially entered the entertainment circle. Was it because of Her Majesty Empress Wu? Sure enough, this was Bai Xinyan's explanation. "In the past, we were all with Her Majesty Empress Wu, and we all have a standard attractiveness. It's very normal for us to admire each other. Comparing mirrors is much more interesting. Unfortunately, Ying is not here. She's probably here to stab you." Compared to Bai Xinyan, Tang Yi's attitude was a bit calmer. She didn't have any intention of sitting down and having a long conversation. She spoke very straightforwardly. "Last time you caused trouble and forced that person to explode. You actually dare to come and join in the fun?" Cat Eyes knew that Tang Yi was referring to the 2000th Miss incident. Bai Xinyan was the one who let out the news, arousing the greed of countless people. Luo Nan, Rui Wan, and even their entire family were pushed into the teeth of the storm. Were it not for the fact that Xia City had two extraordinaries overseeing it, and that they had promptly sent Jin Tong as a sacrifice to the heavens, as well as Luo Nan's world-shaking speech, it was unknown to what degree the situation would have deteriorated to. Bai Xinyan pretended not to know. "I have no choice. I found a new boyfriend, but he's a black-hearted bastard. I can't cure him at all. If I don't destroy a few of his cards, I'll feel like I'm losing out." Tang Yi glanced at her. "What about your boyfriend?" Bai Xinyan laughed as she waved her hand. Her chestnut-colored hair swayed gently. Under her black hair, Her red lips and white teeth were revealed. She had the standard posture of a flirtatious B*TCH. You want that kind of trash to go shopping with a woman? I'll just bring his card. To the side, Cat Eyes thought back to the information she had gathered at the Wild Inn last time. She coldly said, "Isn't it going to be quite difficult to kill them all?" "Of course not. Don't underestimate a woman's evil thoughts." Bai Xinyan was clearly hinting at something, causing Cat Eye's head to ache. This woman was just like that. Her erratic stance, ruthless methods, and the results of harming others and herself. It was obvious that she could not gain anything from it, but she was never tired of it. Unfortunately, she had an ever-changing temperament. She was able to hold on and let go of things. At this time, she giggled and stuck close to Tang Yi. She directly held onto the crook of Tang Yi's arm. "Since we've met, you guys can help me bring disaster to them." Cat Eyes chuckled twice in her heart. She was just about to refuse when she suddenly heard the humming of an engine approaching from above. A rather large motorcade landed on the platform of the high-rise building that belonged to the cultural center. Judging from the banging of the car doors, there were quite a lot of people getting off. Cat Eye's mental senses naturally swept over, and the scene dozens of meters away was taken into her heart. Cat Eyes frowned. It was also at this time that God, who was within the cultural center, contacted her and reported, "The upper echelons of the Liyin Century have come over for a temporary inspection." "I see it. There seems to be another eye-catching guy." This was an unplanned situation, and Cat Eyes was in no mood to mess around with Bai Xinyan. She gave Tang Yi a meaningful glance and coldly said, "Thanks to some people, I'm currently out in the field. I'm afraid I don't have the time." "It's fine as long as I do." Bai Xinyan held onto Tang Yi's arm and did not let go. "Sooner or later, a disaster will always be a disaster. I have nothing to do anyway, so I'll just follow your rhythm." Fine, this person was sticking close. According to Cat Eyes' temperament, she simply could not be bothered to give Bai Xinyan any face. She would just wash her hands and leave. However, there was still Tang Yi in the middle. Tang Yi's expression was calm and tranquil. Her attitude towards Bai Xinyan was completely different, but she never had any intention of pushing Bai Xinyan away. It was clear that there were some tricks that outsiders did not know about. Cat Eyes exchanged glances with Tang Yi once more. They briefly weighed the pros and cons, but in the end, she still curled her lips and walked in front without saying a word. They directly entered the cultural center. From the outside, the cultural center was rather unremarkable. There were not many people inside, but the decorations were exquisite. After entering, a large portion of the clamor of the streets outside was cut off. It was truly the essence of quiet amidst the noise. However, in reality, the atmosphere of this place did not quite match with the rock and roll style of the Mountain Creek Band. The corresponding influence had appeared during the past 2 days of rehearsals. It even directly interfered with the band's song selection. Whether or not the performance was successful was not within the scope of Cat Eyes' concern. Instead, she was deeply curious about the relationship between the two people behind her. Tang Yi and Bai Xinyan walked at the back. At first, Bai Xinyan spoke a few words, but later on, she no longer said anything. The atmosphere was subtle and gradually became oppressive. It was clear that the relationship between them was not as good as Bai Xinyan had described. It would only be more complicated. After the three entered the cultural center, they naturally went in the direction of the concert hall. However, they did not walk far before someone raised their voice and called out to them from the second-floor corridor. "Miss Xinyan." The three raised their heads and saw a group of people stop there. Each of them wore suits and leather shoes, and they looked like business elites. At the head of the group was a middle-sized young man with a dignified appearance. He was currently bowing in greeting from afar. Bai Xinyan smiled and waved her hand. Before she could respond, the young man said a few words to the people beside him. He left the group behind and walked straight down the stairs. It must be said that this was Cat Eyes' first time seeing this person. However, she had long since read his information. Even before entering the cultural center, she had used her mental senses to capture and recognize him. Yukawa Aishuk, the main culprit who had invited Emoya to Band City. Tang Yi's arm was still held by Bai Xinyan. She casually asked, "This can't be your boyfriend, right? He can be a spare tire." Bai Xinyan smiled at the rapidly approaching Yukawa Aishuk in a reserved manner. Her mouth, however, was a different matter. She only suppressed her voice. Yukawa Aishuk was completely unaware of this. He walked closer and bowed once more in greeting. "Miss Xinyan, we meet again. Welcome to Ban City. Please allow me to show you my hospitality as a host." Oh, these two are. Following Yukawa Aishuk's gaze, they entered an especially hypocritical mutual introduction period. Looking at this person's eyes, he clearly knew the identity and background of Cat Eyes and Tang Yi. They were the same. Bai Xinyan asked in a casual manner, "Is there an event here today?" "The music festival is about to begin. The Ikeda Cultural Center is an important branch venue and needs to be inspected. In the next few days, there will be a series of warm-up performances here. Lin also needs to find moldable talents and unearth new potential." Lies. Bai Xinyan immediately concluded. Yukawa Aishuk did not feel awkward. He maintained a polite smile. "I'm sorry, I didn't manage to hide it from Miss Xinyan. Truth is often impolite. In fact, I think this is a good place to hunt women. I like a free and uninhibited soul with a rhythm." At this moment, the gazes of the three women focused on Yukawa Aishuk's face. Soon after, their gazes converged in the air, transmitting subtle information to each other. Of course, Bai Xinyan's eyes were hidden behind her sunglasses. No one could see through her. Yukawa Aishuk very well blended offense and politeness together. "The 6th is the day the Jade Light sets sail. It is also the holiday I set for myself. I hope to bring such a beautiful lady on board and relax for a while." Bai Xinyan asked him again. "Has someone already chosen?" Yukawa Aishuk was about to respond when Cat Eye's wristband vibrated. Cat Eyes swept a glance. The caller was Zhong Yin again. She was too lazy to pick up and directly cut the call. But not even half a second later, her wristband vibrated again. "I should add that kid to my blacklist." But when she looked at the caller ID, it was a different person this time. Cat Eyes was slightly startled. She nodded to the others in apology, walked to the side and answered the call. "Hello, Secretary He?" He Yuan on the other side did not say any pleasantries and directly said, "Mr. Luo left Xia City. Where did he go? Did you make any arrangements beforehand?" God knows how many times he had left. Now that he was finally out in the open for once, it really wasn't easy. Cat Eyes cursed in her heart. But of course she could not say these words out loud. She could only continue to play dumb. "Even you as a secretary don't know. How would I know?" As she spoke, Yukawa Aishuk also received a call a few steps away. That person bowed to Bai Xinyan and Tang Yi. "There are matters that require my attention. I cannot accompany you for a long chat. I am truly sorry. I hope you will give me a chance to remedy this in the future." "Excuse me." Yukawa Aishuk turned around and left after he finished speaking. Even though he did not lack etiquette, it still gave people the feeling that his pace was much more hurried than when he came. Cat Eyes watched his receding figure. Her thoughts were slightly distracted, so much so that He Yuan's crucial words were blurred. She only heard the tail end. "What did you say was in the open sea?" 2 minutes ago, Mr. Luo rode the Flying Devil Ray and moved east into the open sea. His whereabouts are unknown. Huh. Cat Eyes' first thought was nonsense. Don't tell me it's the one raised in the lake in front of Gear on the north bank. That's it. Impossible. That Luo fellow wanted to leave Xia City. He didn't need too many methods. Why did he use this method? Just imagining such a scene made Cat Eyes feel that it was extremely absurd. That Devil Ray looks intimidating, it looks cool, and its destructive power is quite strong, but in the end it's still a sea creature. Even if it's a mutant and has the ability to fly, the branch has measured its flying speed. It can fly at most 70 to 80 kilometers per hour. It's not even as fast as a flying car. 2 minutes. 2 minutes might not even be enough to get out of Acumen College. The Pingjiang district is over 100 kilometers away from the sea. You really don't know. How would I know? He Yuan did not say anything else. She just sent over a video file. Cat Eyes immediately opened it. At this time, Tang Yi and Bai Xinyan walked over, one on the left and one on the right. The three women gathered together and were extremely close. They did not care about anything else. They only looked at the small projection area. The original image was probably a random shot by a passerby. The ambient noise was very noisy, but the anti-shake lens was very powerful. It clearly projected a white scar that continuously advanced forward, cutting through the horizon. Judging from its height, it was at least 1,000 meters. When the camera zoomed in, the person who recorded it immediately burst out with profanity. "Fuck me." Chapter 778. After saying goodbye to Bai Xinyan and the others, Yukawa Aishuk did not join up with the mighty patrol team. Instead, he went directly to the upper level of the cultural center, to a temporary private room. In here, he turned on the projection system and silently looked at the video data from various channels. The angles, sharpness, and duration of these videos were all different. But the core content of the video was, without exception, the sky above Xia City, the dazzling flight trail. The advantage of piling up data was that there was more information than appearing through a single channel. This set of video data started from when Luo Nan stepped out of gear on the north bank, shook off Zhonglang, and boarded the Flying Devil Ray all the way until he entered the sea outside Xia City. The entire process was recorded. The internal intelligence analyst of the corporation listed out the information revealed in the series of videos one by one. Target flight distance 134 kilometers. Target flight speed, Mach 2. 5 average speed. Maximum speed, Mach 4. The Devil Ray's limbs are in an unnatural state. High probability is that it is only a carrier of energy operation. Flight altitude, temperature, and surrounding atmospheric environment do not meet the conditions for a flight trail. It is suspected that there is a large amount of water vapor gathering beforehand. The analyzed data elements were extremely detailed. It looked like Luo Nan had been thoroughly dissected inside and out. A countermeasure could be formulated at any time. But reality was far from this. Yukawa Aishuk only skimmed through the video analysis data once. His mind was elsewhere. But after these videos, after flying out of Xia City, it went straight to the bottom of the sea. Its whereabouts are unknown. This was the result of integrating a large amount of intelligence data. Yukawa Aishuk furrowed his brows. His expression was as heavy as water. Ban City and Xia City were only 1,500 kilometers apart. With the speed of the Flying Devil Ray, it would take half an hour to reach Xia City. If this was the case, then it would save him a lot of trouble. Even if it was a nuclear bomb, it would be exposed to the satellite, radar, and other monitoring systems. There would be people to deal with it. But after Luo Nan flew out of Xia City, he went straight to the bottom of the sea. This move alone turned 70 to 80% of the satellite and radar equipment into scrap. After entering the sea, it was unknown what method he had used, but a living person and a mutant with vigorous vitality had disappeared without alerting the sonar array and various monitoring systems at the bottom of the sea. They had disappeared without a trace just like that. If this was the case, then things were really troublesome. While Yukawa Aishuk was deep in thought, there was a knock on the door. After receiving permission, the group's intelligence analysis section chief, Takamoto Shigeru, quietly entered. This lean middle-aged man was Yukawa Aishuk's confidant, and was also in charge of handling the most sensitive issues. After entering, Takamoto Shigeru immediately expressed his concern. "President, there's a lot of bad news going around about you." Yukawa Hidesuk slightly waved his hand, interrupting Luo Nan's words. He just asked, "Where in the world did Luo Nan go?" Takamoto Shigeru stood upright. "I'm sorry, but we haven't been able to find any traces of him." "Why?" Yukawa Aishuk stared at his confidant. Luo Nan can conceal his aura, but the Devil Ray is a huge target. In terms of the strength of his blood energy, it's almost at the B-rank standard. The outer seas are the domain of the marine aberrations, and they are very densely distributed. As long as it enters the domain of other aberrations, it will definitely cause conflict. There is no way it can hide. Before Yukawa Aishuk could finish his sentence, a call came in on the secret line. It must be said that he possessed an astonishing amount of influence in Ban City, but the people who were able to fight their way into this line were not easy to deal with. He could only split his attention to deal with it. The moment the call connected, the person on the other side asked, "Tomokawa-kun, have you heard the news that the Cage Master is coming to Ban City? A powerful A-rank threat could enter the country illegally at any time. Governor Do is very worried about this." Yukawa Aishik furrowed his brows, but his tone was very calm. "Kondo-kun, I am also paying close attention to this news. However, in a similar situation, we can only obtain more detailed information by consulting the military. On my side, isn't it Tomokawa-kun who invited that person's relative to perform in Ban City? Governor Do believes that you have a good relationship with that person, so he hopes to express his concern through Tomokawa-kun." Yukawa Aishik's gaze was ice cold when he heard this. He swept his gaze across Takamoto Shigeru's face, and Takamoto nodded slightly, indicating that this was what he wanted to say earlier. Great waves of emotions churned in Yukawa Aishik's heart. He managed to deal with Governor Do's loyal dog with great difficulty. He hung up the phone and stared at Takamoto Shigeru. "Someone is deliberately spreading the news that I invited Emoya to participate in the music festival? Having a smart boss would save a lot of time and effort." Of course, Takamoto Shigeru couldn't simply go along with this. He spoke of the details. "Apologies, President. The news spreads very quickly. It happened before this incident. Therefore, the intelligence department believed that the Jade Society was deliberately spreading the news. They were still coordinating and communicating with each other, but things got out of hand because of Luo Nan's flight." Before this, Yukawa Aishik rewound the video and rewatched the first half of the video, especially the entire process of Luo Nan coming out of gear on the north bank, forcefully shaking off Zonggong's entanglement, and summoning the Flying Devil Ray. Luo Nan's face was cold the entire time. It could even be said that he was expressionless. It was in line with his usual reserved persona, but according to Takamoto Shigeru, there was clearly a deeper meaning behind this. He's putting on an act? Did he plan all of this? There's no problem logically. Takamoto Shigeru spoke in a low voice. There's a lot of news right now that Emoya's personal freedom has been restricted. Add the stimulation from the wilderness laboratory, and Luo Nan will react intensely to this. This includes but is not limited to carrying out an unrestrained large-scale conflict in Ban City, attacking the Jade Light Crews, assassinating related personnel, and so on. Since his whereabouts are unknown right now, he's given too much room for imagination. Plus, the infrasonic wave ability that Luo Nan developed for the Flying Devil Ray is a serious threat to ability users under B rank. This is especially true for the majority of people in the secular world. If he uses this weapon, if he dares to use this weapon, he's dead for sure. Yukawa Aishik slammed the table heavily. The Ban City ability user branch, the Ban City branch of every order, and the headquarters of the Amaterasu Order. There are plenty of powerful people who can kill him. Takamoto Shigeru really wanted to remind his president that the only people in Ban City who could truly kill Luo Nan were the two extraordinaries of the Amaterasu Order. But the words came to his mouth. But he hasn't displayed any clear inclination up until now. This was where Luo Nan was the smartest. Chapter 779. There's no news of Luo Nan's whereabouts at the moment. Okay, we'll keep in touch. I'm not the organizer of the auction, but I will communicate with the Toyama auction house about the relevant matters. Hino-kun, if you've seen the video, you should know that it's impossible to maintain that speed for a long time. Otherwise, why would he hide under the sea? My opinion isn't important. This is the analysis of a professional. After a few rounds of phone calls, Yukawa Aishik's head was about to explode. Just now, someone actually asked him if he could get the Jade Light to set sail ahead of schedule to help Ban City escape from the center of the hurricane. Were those idiots joking? The problem was that the people who called didn't think so at all. To them, it was a matter of life and death. Ignoring it would be the greatest joke. After being bombarded by all sides, Yukawa Aishik could not help but feel restless. It was without a doubt that the more brilliant Luo Nan's response was, the more his sorry state was manifested. This was a situation that Luo Nan had never thought of when he had designed the entire plan. Driven by his terrible mood, Yukawa Ishik silently clenched his teeth. He forced himself to remain calm, and tried to mock Luo Nan. Luo Nan sure is ruthless. I don't know how far away he is from Ban City, but I'm closer to his sister. Bastard. At the end of his sentence, Yukawa Ishik cursed, mostly at himself. He had obviously lost his composure. His words were seriously out of character, and from the most realistic point of view, he really did not have the confidence to do so. The Luo Nan from the intelligence reports was a fellow who could do anything. It was true that the Yuchuan family was a large family with a large business, but the foundation of their business was still in Ban City. If Luo Nan really were to disregard everything and use infrasonic waves to cleanse the land, Luo Nan might not be able to live after this, but the Yuchuan family would basically be removed from the list of powers with global influence. He would only be asking to be humiliated if he didn't tear off all the feathers on that brat's body. Takamoto Shigeru lowered his head in silence, giving Yukawa Ishik a chance to adjust himself. Yukawa Ishik took a deep breath and closed his eyes. The sudden darkness stimulated his imagination to a certain extent. He felt as if he had touched a spider web between the branches and leaves. He thought he could brush it off easily, but he did not expect the web to be so sticky and entangled him. He wanted to break free, but when he turned his head, he met the cold eyes of the spider. After a brief moment of absent-mindedness, Yukawa Ishik's thoughts continued to flow. He had underestimated Luo Nan before. In the end, the information obtained from the intelligence reports was still not solid enough. In other words, it did not reflect his growth and progress during this period of time. Now that he had suffered this move, he finally understood a little. However, being stung was truly painful. Yukawa Ishik slammed the table heavily. His emotions had not calmed down yet. The childish face in the intelligence report appeared clearly again. It blended together with the spider in his imagination, slowly changing and correcting itself. Actually, many people had to revise their impressions of Luo Nan from this moment on. Similarly, in Ban City, on the Ray yacht on Beishan Lake, the lights in the living area of the lower deck were habitually extinguished. Only the projection light propped up a semi-illusory light screen. There was a complex configuration picture on it, but it had been on for a long time. Luo Nan's head leaned back, the back of his neck resting against the back of the sofa. His eyelids were closed, seeming to have already fallen asleep. Maybe he's too tired, Inlo thought. It seemed that Luo Nan hadn't slept for over 40 hours. He didn't do his exoskeleton armor training anymore. His entire mind was placed on the double helix structure. Plus, the frequency of his trips to Xia City had increased by a lot. He had just returned. It was this trip that gave Inlo a fright. How in the world did he do it? Everything that Luo Nan did in the past few hours was far too horrifying. The flying devil ray that forcefully accelerated to Mach 4 mysteriously disappeared after entering the sea. Then Luo Nan appeared on Beishan Lake in Ban City a few minutes later. The latter could be explained by the mysteries of the transmission array. But how could one explain the mysterious disappearance of the devil ray that soared into the sky? Also, the mysterious and unfathomable methods, the urgent steps, and the drumbeat were clearly signs of an impending storm. But Luo Nan had yet to make it clear where his target was. Clearly she, his temporary personal secretary, Mrs. Halder, who was far away in T-City, and the entire Bloodflame Order had yet to obtain Luo Nan's complete trust. Or perhaps, they had yet to rise to the level he needed. Inli's mind was filled with thoughts, but she did not dare to disturb him. She wanted to return to the attendant room to get some things, so she quietly made her way over. But when she passed behind the sofa, she suddenly felt something abnormal. The temperature of the air, or more accurately, the temperature of the air surrounding Luo Nan, had clearly risen. The natural flow of heat was clearly under some sort of control. There were no abnormalities within a meter, so Inlo had not discovered it before. But at this moment, Inlo borrowed the dusky light to faintly see that Luo Nan's complexion was off. An abnormal layer of dark red spread to every inch of his skin as far as the eye could see. This couldn't be a fever. Did something go wrong with his cultivation? The thought flashed through her mind, and Yinli's heart tightened. She subconsciously extended her hand to touch Luo Nan's forehead. She was just a few centimeters away from touching Luo Nan when the skin on her fingertips actually felt a scorching sensation. This was a disaster. Yinli suddenly retracted her hand. Aside from being shocked, she also recalled that this was a critical symptom. She absolutely could not allow any external stimulation. She took a step back, wanting to report to Mrs. Halder. If Luo Nan was sick, he could find a doctor. There were doctors on the yacht. But if there were problems with his cultivation, he could only rely on a senior figure in this field. The dark room suddenly lit up at this moment. Yinlu instinctively raised her head and saw Luo Nan open his eyes. The light that illuminated the dark room seemed to have shot out from the depths of his eyes. Was it a hallucination? What's the matter? Luo Nan's tone was flat, forming a stark contrast with the heat that bubbled around his body. Mister, just now you. Yinlu did not know how to describe it. Oh, I was gathering energy. Ha! Luo Nan turned his head, and his gaze pointed forward. However, it was not focused on a certain place. His clairvoyance was focused on the depths of the void. There were countless threads of light crisscrossing. The layers of light converged to form a deep spiderweb structure. Bloody light followed the direction of the threads on the spiderweb structure, pouring into countless nodes. Then it spread and grew from there, intersecting with each other. This was the altar spiderweb constructed by the Wraith sign. However, this was the control system presented by the feedback of Luo Nan Qi, which had probed into the human heart. Chapter 780. Luo Nan's improved control system was a great improvement over the original altar spiderweb's extensive model of the victor notifies the loser, and the loser dies. Luo Nan's own design ideas were added in. Now his thought process had almost become instinctive. He paid more attention to rational control, and had his own set of rules and laws. Right now, the new version of the altar spiderweb was like the cotton candy machine that he saw in the Museum of Life when he was a child. A small stick was stirred in the machine, and countless visible and invisible sugar threads were entangled, forming an amazing creation that was as white as a cloud. Luo Nan was that small wooden stick. He used the Luo Nan ruler to probe the heaven and earth, the universe, and the myriad phenomena of the human heart. He transferred and absorbed power from within, regardless of whether the power came from the mighty force of heaven and earth or the turbid flow of the human heart. They were just crude raw materials that had to be broken and reassembled into sugar threads. Then they would intertwine and form different clouds. With himself as the foundation, they would form a more delicate, dense, and sturdy structure. Heaven, earth, time, space, human nature, I am the central axis. Luo Nan was still a distance away from being able to completely control this power, but he was still progressing in the end. He had already gained a wealth of experience from Madame Halder, Cat Eyes, and the others. All he was doing was constantly searching for more effective configurations to utilize. Now it was finally time to show his strength. Luo Nan took a deep breath, carefully adjusting the state of his fleshly body. In today's world, information traveled far and wide. Luo Nan's soul cloak covered the entire world. The control network built on this foundation could be said to be a natural gathering of power. Because of this, the vitality and yuan qi flowing on the spider web on the altar, and the even more intangible soul power only accumulated for a short period of time, but it was already enough to make him the mastermind behind the scenes who was taking advantage of the situation. Eat too much. Now the divine chakra and the body chakra were coupled, and the body and soul interacted with each other. Both were reciprocating each other, maintaining a basic balance. But as the accumulated power continued to rise, the upper limit of what his body could bear was also reached. If he continued to devour, there was a risk that the framework of his body and soul would lose balance. Fortunately, Luo Nan had made countless adjustments and experiments over the past few months. His body and soul frame had gradually grown accustomed to the pressure of this sudden rise. Even if there were still various inadequacies, it would be enough for the time being. Besides, to deal with Gongqi, he had to give up something. Luo Nan suppressed his body and soul frame. It was hard to avoid some blood and energy anomalies. Inlo was trembling with fear as she watched from behind. In the end, she couldn't help but say, "Sir, are you sure it's okay? What problem can I have?" At this critical moment, Luo Nan's state of mind actually relaxed. He casually teased Inlo. "I see that you have quite a lot of questions. Do you want to ask?" Inlo was completely caught in Luo Nan's rhythm. Her mind was absent-minded, and she blurted out, "Where's the flying devil ray?" "Oh, that guy. I'll have to trouble you then." Luo Nan thought of something when Inlo mentioned it. He flipped his wrist and magically took out a crystal ball and held it in his palm. Catch. Luo Nan didn't even turn his head as he tossed the crystal ball behind him. The latter instinctively reached out to catch it, but he felt that it was as light as a feather and lacked texture, as if it was made of fine yarn. It felt very strange, so he raised it in front of his eyes and examined it with the help of the light from the projection. The crystal ball was about the size of a baby's fist. Like many similar products, there was a small object sealed inside that was still moving. Inlu took a closer look, and in the next second, her body stiffened. The devil ray, the object sealed inside the crystal ball, was about half a centimeter long. It was very miniature, but it had wide wings and a long tail. It had a head fin on top, and its body was flat. It was a miniature version of the devil ray. Upon closer inspection, one could even see the electricity radiating from its tail. Yes, it was the mutated devil ray that Luo Nan had subdued. It was the vicious monster that caused the people of the inner world, even Xia City and Ban City, to be panic-stricken. But Luo Nan was the real monster for this kind of operation. "Me, mister, this is?" Inlu stuttered. "It's that devil ray. But how did it?" "Well, I stored some seawater and fish in the ocean. I sealed it together with the devil ray into a spatial fault. Right now this crystal ball is just a speculum. It will reflect the image within the fault. Don't worry about breaking it. It won't be able to escape." Luo Nan finally turned his head and gave instructions. "However, there are some flaws in the design of the fault. It won't last long, and the environment is vile. That fellow is quite stifled inside. Also, I just strengthened it, so its skeleton structure is a bit mutated. It needs to be nourished, so I need to let it out to get some fresh air. It just so happens that North Mountain Lake is a suitable environment. I'll leave this job to you." Inlu was stunned speechless. Luo Nan took it as her tacit agreement. He continued, "In a bit, I'll map the exit onto the crystal ball. You just need to take it and wander around the lake a couple of times. You need to avoid the more troublesome territories of the mutants to avoid a fight between the two sides. It'll be too loud and draw suspicion." It was impossible for Inlu to refuse, but she still tried to figure out the core logic. "How in the world did you do this?" Luo Nan thought for a moment and replied, "Just do more questions. The results will be even better if you practice it for a long time." Inlo believed that Luo Nan was just casually answering her. Little did she know that Luo Nan was speaking the 100% truth. The so-called doing questions was none other than the general education level test simulation system that Luo Nan had dug out from the tree hole. To be more precise, it was the enormous question bank that the system was equipped with. Luo Nan was still unable to crack this simulation system. However, he had participated in the test over and over again. He was always able to see a few extremely ingenious configuration questions, and they were extremely well integrated with real problems. Over and over again, he was continuously polishing his thoughts. And the standard answers to these questions were tantamount to secret configuration techniques in a certain sense. Unfortunately, time was too tight. There were some opportunities that would never appear again once they were lost. There were some problems that would only become more thorny as time passed. He couldn't drag things on with the cloud world any longer. Luo Nan turned his head around and leaned against the sofa. He assumed a comfortable posture. "I want to ask you about something." "Ah, what do you think your boss will be able to do to break through the bottleneck of his cultivation?" Inla was more or less used to Luo Nan's drastic change in topic. She soon switched her field of thought and recalled Mrs. Halder's masochistic cultivation over the past half year. He can practically give up everything, including his life. This Forget it. I'll just ask her directly. Luo Nan could completely sense Mrs. Halder's location through the Bloodsoul Temple of the Abyss District and directly communicate with her. Inla didn't want to participate in the specifics, but Luo Nan didn't have any intentions of hiding it. He just treated it as a phone call. He spoke word by word clearly. Mrs. Halder, there's an uncertain opportunity that may allow you to break through your shackles. Are you interested? Luo Nan switched to the projected image in front of him at this time. The configuration blueprint was replaced with an electronic sand table that covered the entire globe's topographic mapping information. Such a work was most likely from the military. It wasn't strange for Luo Nan to have a copy with his current status. But what use was he taking it out for? Luo Nan shrunk the electronic sand table to its smallest size. The highly realistic 3D image converged and slowly rotated in the virtual work area. It was as if the entire planet was placed in the palm of his hand. Then he tapped with his finger. Inla was very familiar with the location he tapped at. T-City. Luo Nan chose Mercenary City in the Pacific Ocean. His mouth was still talking to Mrs. Halder. Yes. Of course there's a price. There's a possibility of death. Inla really didn't know what Mrs. Halder's response was. But the smile on Luo Nan's face clearly indicated his inclination. Excellent. Then please make a long trip. Go here. Luo Nan rotated the Earth. From the deep blue Pacific Ocean, he instantly arrived at the plateau region of South Central Asia. He lit up his mark once more, forming a dark red dot. You'll be pleasantly surprised. However, it most likely won't have a decisive effect. You need to wait. You also need some luck. What Luo Nan didn't say was that those two were also waiting high above the distant clouds. They also needed luck. It was just that these elements all needed to be controlled and given to by him. Snake Tongue's spirit body shrunk into a ball high above the clouds. She curled up in the yarn of silence, protecting a bit of her core. She also endured the nourishment and infiltration of external forces. Right now, it was Gong Qi's turn to inject vitality into Snake Tongue. It was just that the requirements for vitality on the spiritual level were too harsh. External forces could only treat the symptoms but not the root cause. Even if he poured in all his strength, it would be pretty good if he could use a single point out of 10 points. This required Snake Tongue's cooperation. But how could Snake Tongue possibly cooperate with him? Even though she was certain that Gong Qi needed to protect her psychic awareness from being extinguished in order to search for clues, it was impossible for her to escape unscathed now that her secret had been discovered. Snake Tongue's mental state was collapsing badly. She was certain, yet she was in despair, and she was rejoicing in Luo Nan's misfortune. Overall, Gong Qi was quite calm. At least he was calm in front of Snake Tongue. He had already come to a partial conclusion, after a period of examination and deduction. He tried to communicate with Snake Tongue. Looking at your situation, it's very likely that there's such a person in the space and time where Earth is located. He should be proficient in soul summoning, and similar spells. Due to certain reasons, he discovered your hidden corporeal body. He also discovered your out-of-body situation. For some unknown reason, he used soul summoning to establish a connection with your soul through your corporeal body. After all, the marvelous connection between the body and the soul is unfathomable. It's hard to thoroughly investigate. Even if it penetrates the barrier of space and time and affects this cloud world, it's still unknown. Snake Tongue didn't respond at all. Gong Qi minded his own business and continued speaking. No matter what, it at least proves that the cloud world isn't a sealed-off world. There is a way to interact with the outside world. What we need to find right now is the trajectory of this interaction. That is also our path home. Two specks of ghostly flames lit up within the yarn of silence. It was Snake Tongue's ice-cold gaze. This path is already severed. The person you're imagining, even if there really is such a person, has already given up trying. Perhaps he's already discovered your ambush here. Not necessarily. Gong Qi laughed calmly. For him to be able to fuse your soul and body, his methods are indeed superb. But without a soul item like the Yarn of Silence as an anchor, I don't believe that he could conveniently extend his tentacles into this world. Under normal circumstances, who would think that such a marvelous plane of space and time existed? I'm more inclined to believe that he's currently making meticulous arrangements and preparing a new ritual. He's preparing to do more with your corporeal body. Snake Tongue recalled her dreamland experience, but she felt that it was completely different. She couldn't help but sneer. Secretary Gong is really... Halfway through her words, her divine sense was suddenly covered in a layer of hazy mist. It was as if a mirage was revolving around her, reflecting a marvelous scene. The dense mist didn't disperse. Chapter 781. This is it. Gong Qi caught the change in Snake Tongue's body in the first instant. His figure closed in, but he didn't interfere. Instead, he carefully observed the aftermath. But on the other side, Snake Tongue had a rather subtle feeling. This was because it wasn't quite the same as before. Her soul had split and a wisp of her soul had returned to Ban City. Instead, the Mirage Chi fog wall was growing thicker and thicker. Moreover, it wasn't only on the plane of her consciousness. It directly affected the material plane and appeared in the cloud world. Could it be as Gong Qi had said? That the powerhouse far away in Earth's spacetime had made meticulous preparations these past few days and changed a method to work on her body? But why was there no pulling force between her soul and flesh for so long? Snake Tongue wanted to contact that person and seize the opportunity to issue a warning. She also wanted to beg that person to help her break away from the clouds and escape Gong Qi's control. No matter what kind of fate awaited her later, as long as she changed her way of living, or even how she died, she could accept it. However, that powerhouse on Earth didn't give her this opportunity. The Mirage Chi fog wall grew thicker and thicker. She hoped for Ban City and the fusion of her soul and flesh, but she still couldn't see a shadow. She didn't know what had gone wrong. Right now Gong Qi drifted over and spoke to her. Just as he opened his mouth, his voice and transmitted thoughts suddenly became indistinct. It was as if there really was a thick curtain wall separating them, making them indistinct and indistinct. This was a situation neither Snake Tongue nor Gong Qi had expected. Before they could react, the Mirage Chi fog wall rumbled and surged. It erupted and flowed, cutting off their line of sight. As for Snake Tongue, she felt a heavy attractive force appear out of nowhere and act upon her spiritual body. In the blink of an eye, Snake Tongue and Gong Qi had unexpectedly become isolated from each other. Moreover, this attractive force. Snake Tongue. The brief thought was like an ice-cold thorn. It forcefully broke through the Mirage Chi fog wall and pierced inside. Snake Tongue's mind was muddled. Gong Qi instantly exploded with a chill that could nearly freeze her. He suspects me. That this was premeditated? It would be great if there was. Because of Gong Qi's reaction, Snake Tongue suddenly had a flash of inspiration. She no longer cared about the other side. She didn't think too much, and she didn't care about her wording. She frantically radiated her thoughts and spirit waves, revealing everything that was going on in her heart. Save me. Save me. No matter what you want to do, no matter what you arrange, I don't want to die. I don't want to become a puppet. Save me. The Mirage fog wall completely isolated Gong Qi's figure and weakened his will, allowing Snake Tongue's courage to recover. The heavy suction force that had been in effect from beginning to end caused the hope in her heart to grow crazily. She tried her best to radiate her psychic waves, all for a response. Snake Tongue. Gong Qi's will penetrated the fog wall for the second time. Even though it was blocked by the Mirage fog wall, his killing intent was clearly transmitted, and then the fog wall shook. That was the impact from Gong Qi. The ice-cold emotions and the power of an extraordinary forcefully distorted the fog wall, allowing bone-piercing cold air to penetrate inside and create howling winds. Under this attack, Snake Tongue's spirit body was like a candle flame swaying in the wind. She could be extinguished at any moment. In reality, under such an impact, she had already lost the ability to think deeply. She could only instinctively continue crying for help, and there was no other reaction. It was also at this time that Gong Qi took advantage of the fact that he had yet to break through the wall of fog. He poured his thoughts into it, and the yarn of silence around Snake Tongue's spirit body began to exert strength. It suddenly contracted and compressed, attempting to cut off her path of life. My lord! My lord! Snake Tongue used the honorifics of Sakura City to continue crying and praying. Fortunately, the surrounding fog wall interfered with Gong Qi's control over the yarn of silence. She was able to slow down for a moment, and her already extremely weak spirit body contracted once more, barely condensing into a sphere of light. For this reason, she even abandoned a portion of her spirit body's structure, thus obtaining a few seconds of breathing space. However, after a short period of breathing space, what Snake Tongue waited for wasn't a helping hand from her lord. Instead, it was Gong Qi's cold and gloomy voice. Aren't you thinking too much? A greenish-gray color rapidly spread above the mirage fog wall. Everywhere it passed, the surging fog froze and lost its vitality. Soon after, the claw reached in and the fog wall opened. Gong Qi brought out his true ability. The greenish-gray glowing fog that had been gathering and dispersing outside of his spirit body was the pure essence energy he cultivated with his life. It froze all the changes in the fog wall, causing it to shatter with a bang. Snake Tongue had already consumed a large portion of her vital energy. She was completely unable to react. She could only look on helplessly as the claw rapidly approached, about to crush her spirit body. But at this moment, Snake Tongue's consciousness blurred once more. The strange suction force that had been acting on her spirit body finally accumulated enough power. The quantitative change caused a qualitative change. Behind her, an incorporeal hole suddenly opened. The grayish-white color seeped out from inside and rapidly spread, swallowing her up before immediately contracting. There was only a thin line separating them, but Gong Qi's entire figure broke through the fog wall and pressed over. He also saw the spreading and shrinking colors, as well as the inconceivable hole in the clouds in the void. The hole wasn't large to begin with. It was just large enough to swallow Snake Tongue's extremely condensed spirit body. Judging purely by his eyes, he could at most extend an arm through it. Furthermore, it was rapidly shrinking. It looked like it was about to disappear into the drifting mist. Gong Qi didn't have time to think too much. His figure distorted into light and accelerated once more. He practically stuck close to Snake Tongue's spirit body and crashed into the hole together. The sky suddenly darkened. In the instant of this change, Gong Qi was already 100% certain that he could capture Snake Tongue. However, his mind inexplicably trembled. He didn't care about anything else. His spirit body that had transformed into light deviated and flew backwards. However, the whistling sand and dust filled the air. When he crashed into it, the hole he had just entered through had already disappeared without a trace. When he crashed into it again, there was only emptiness. Gong Qi was startled. Snake Tongue was only several meters away. It was like she was having an illogical nightmare. By the time she was slightly clear-headed, the shackles of the Veil of Silence were still there. Gong Qi was also there and he was very close at hand. All the torment hadn't caused any fundamental changes. It was just that the bloody light and mist interweaved in the clouds had turned into a gloomy place where dust and mist surged. Where is this? She had been trapped in the cloud world for half a year. Chaotic clouds and bloody light were everywhere as far as the eye could see. Snake Tongue really wasn't used to suddenly entering a realm with a different hue. All she knew was that this wasn't the band city that she yearned for day and night. The dust and mist that fluttered in the sky shouldn't be the same as the fog wall that isolated her from the outside world. The powerful suction force had disappeared without a trace at some unknown time. Snake Tongue felt terrible. It wasn't just her emotions, but also her most intuitive feelings. Her spirit body was extremely weak. She had relied on a highly condensed method to prolong her life. But in this gloomy place, she felt that something was wrong. Her spirit body was erratic and unstable. Her core structure also showed signs of dispersing. She couldn't piece it back together no matter what. It seemed like in the next second, she would assimilate with the dust and mist that filled the sky. She would be torn apart and disintegrated. Chapter 782. A Trap. Gong Qi immediately responded to Snake Tongue. His piercing thoughts carried a bit of ridicule, but the direction he pointed at was rather subtle. I originally thought it was an inside and outside collusion, but now it seems I was overthinking it. That lord of yours made you believe you could return to Ban City and merge your soul and body. In the end, he gave you a glimmer of hope and deceived you. Because of this, he also deceived me. Especially when you were comparing the two, your mentality was unbalanced. You made a hasty judgment amidst an unforeseen event, and your brain became hot-headed. Hee, what a good plan. In this terrible situation, Gongqi displayed his shrewdness and ruthlessness. He maintained his mentality quite well. At least in front of Snake Tongue, he maintained a calm attitude. He slowly moved over and looked at Snake Tongue, who was wrapped in the yarn of silence. She was shaped like a pearl of light, but she was even more fragile than a bubble. I never expected that there would be such a world beneath the boundless clouds. I deserve to be schemed against. But what about you, Snake Tongue? It's already hard to control your scattered spirit body. Instead, you have to rely on the yarn of silence to withstand it. It seems that lord of yours doesn't take you seriously. In the end, you're nothing more than bait. After the big fish takes the bait, you're useless. Gongqi's thoughts were like a blade. His words struck at the heart, and Snake Tongue's pearl of light fluctuated. As it swelled and shrank, it looked like it was about to shatter. In reality, her spirit body was heavily injured, and her spiritual will had suffered a blow. In addition to the vile environment, she was on the verge of death. Seeing this situation, Gongqi furrowed his brows. He no longer provoked her. His previous words had been wasted. Gongqi's original intention was to destroy Snake Tongue's mental defenses in one fell swoop in this desperate situation. He wanted her to remove the obstacle in her despair and fuse with the yarn of silence, removing the last hidden danger. This would make it convenient for him to focus all his attention on dealing with the great enemy. Unexpectedly, Snake Tongue was even more useless than he had imagined. In fact, it wasn't difficult to transform Snake Tongue into the yarn of silence at this moment. However, she was so weak that she was on the verge of collapse. She might not be able to withstand the impact of the transformation. Once the core structure of her spirit body was destroyed, what benefit would there be in swallowing her? If he wanted to satisfy both sides, he would inevitably have to focus his mind and do some meticulous work. This was simply an opportunity for the powerful enemy hidden behind the sandstorm. All sorts of thoughts revolved in Gongqi's mind. In the end, he flicked his finger and sent a speck of light into the veil of silence. It changed slightly and poured some life force into Snake Tongue. It's better to keep it for now. After all, the connection between the soul and flesh is a clue. In this maze realm where the laws are in chaos and time and space are collapsing, I have to hold on to any thread. I can't lose it easily. But why hasn't the great enemy that lured me into the trap appeared? Ever since Gongqi had entered this maze of sand and dust, he had been vigilantly searching at all times, attempting to use his mental senses to detect traces of the enemy, but to no avail. On the other hand, when he spread out his spiritual senses, they were tightly restrained and sluggish. This made him have some guesses. He casually picked up a grain of sand that was spinning past and carefully observed it. This particle was shaped like a grain of sand, but under the probing of soul force, one could see that its structure was so complicated that it made one's eyes pop out. It seemed to meander, it seemed to be transparent, it seemed like a layer, it seemed like a beehive, it seemed like the masterpiece of a miniature sculptor. When he tried to analyze it further and let his soul power seep in, there was a force within the sand that resisted and melted. Soon, the sand expanded slightly before shattering into even more indescribable fragments that mixed into the surrounding dust. He had seen this thing before. Gongqi had already lived for nearly 100 years. He had experienced the vicissitudes of the 21st century, the age of distortion, the World War, the post-war revival, the construction of the inner world, and so on. The number of dead transcendents he had seen was several times more than the number of living transcendents. It wouldn't be a problem to say that he had seen and experienced a lot. His experience filled in his knowledge and helped him make judgments. Domain fragments. That's much more complicated, and there are far too many of them. Such strange objects weren't just 1 or 2 grains or 3 or 5 piles. Instead, they were scattered as far as the eye could see, boundless. Even if the crushed dust occupied an even vaster space, this quantity far exceeded the norm. Gongqi tried to find the logic behind this exceeding the norm, and he quickly came up with a few guesses. It was these guesses that caused unprecedented waves to arise in his mind. What is this? Snake Tongue's thoughts drifted into his mind. She relied on Gongqi's infusion of vital energy to forcefully stabilize her mind and awaken. She didn't want to mention the matter of food and bait again. She could only focus her limited mind on the key elements in front of her. Fortunately, she was close to Gongqi and received some radiation effects. Otherwise, she would only be able to open her eyes wide and be blind in this treacherous area. Her weak soul force simply wouldn't be able to probe forward. Gongqi straightforwardly answered Snake Tongue's doubts. This is a domain fragment. Domain fragment. Snake Tongue was absent-minded for a moment. Soon after, she emphasized the words in front of her. That's right. It's exactly what you think. If an extraordinary formed and solidified a domain in his peak state, then he was forcefully killed and his domain shattered. What remains is this object. Gongqi smiled and said, I heard that you grew up in the Hachiman Temple. Back then, the Amaterasu order swept through the archipelago. Those who complied with them flourished, and those who opposed them perished. I don't remember who that person from the main temple was. It said that he died in such a way. It seems that there are also such relics that are worshipped all year round. Perhaps you've seen them before. That's right. There were originally over 30 of them. However, they were the best divine objects for incantations. After repeated use over the years, they were eroded and worn away. When I left, there were less than 20 of them. Snake Tongue compared them to her memories. She matched them with great difficulty, but she was startled by the logic behind it. But there are too many here. According to this inference, how many extraordinaries had fallen in these scattered fragments? Hundreds? Thousands? Over 10,000? If this was truly the case, then all the extraordinary since the era of distortion added together would be nothing more than a fraction. They might not all be the relics of extraordinaries. If it's a plane like the Deep Blue World or a half-plane of a lower rank, it's still unknown. Didn't some people say that in a certain sense, domains and planes can be equated? Take Ouyangchen's so-called logic world for example. 100 or so exploded in one go. Perhaps it's on a similar scale. Perhaps we're in a shattered world fragment. Of course, there's bound to be an even more fundamental space-time structure outside the fragment. Otherwise, where would we find a place to stand? But even so, the rules of space-time have already been destroyed. It forms an enormous suppression on the strength of outsiders. It's a good place to set up an ambush. This level of knowledge already surpassed the scope of Snake Tongue's common knowledge. If she heard it on an ordinary day, she would certainly firmly remember it and think of every method to get to the bottom of it. But in this current situation, she could only remain silent. At this time, Gongqi suddenly laughed. Amidst his laughter, he extended his hand. His lustrous and translucent spirit body structure sufficiently interfered with the sandstorm dust mist, rippling with spirit waves. After several attempts, he opened his mouth again. In any case, this is a secret land of enormous value. It can make all the apex scientists and research organizations that study spacetime and planes go crazy. If it were me, I would hide this place tightly and not reveal the slightest bit of it. Then, I would devote myself to research. But that person's methods are incomprehensible. Such meticulous planning step by step, and calculating our reactions perfectly. He's like a specter that hides by our side and monitors us for a long time. He knows our actions like the back of his hand, and he plans to target us. It wouldn't be strange for such a person to play any tricks. But he just had to use this part of the world as a trap. Moreover, he didn't make his move the instant we stepped into the trap. We missed a great opportunity. Why? Snake Tongue's train of thought was already led away by Gongqi. That's because his strength isn't enough. Gongqi directly concluded. Perhaps that person's treacherous methods are impossible to guard against, causing people to unconsciously raise their judgment of him. But the methods of doing things can't replace the rhythm, especially the bright rhythm that belongs to the strong. It's possible that everything is linked together, but it definitely wouldn't be as sloppy as it is now. Clearly, he's counting on this May's realm to reduce my strength. It's just a pity that he doesn't understand the matters of the extraordinary plane. Snake Tongue could feel that the identity of the person Gongqi spoke of was already on the verge of being revealed. She wasn't willing to play the role of a supporting character, but the accumulated emotions dictated her words and actions. Even if it would be very difficult for her to leave this place alive, she still had to figure out the identity of the so-called Lord that was toying with her in the palm of his hand. Who is he? You still haven't figured it out? You need to properly adjust your mentality. In such a sealed environment, there shouldn't be any extra clues or extra people. Therefore, the most likely person is the one that sent you here. Amidst the low voice, a vague image was imprinted in Snake Tongue's mind. The outline was gradually corrected, and it gradually became clear. She was about to blurt it out. Of course, in her current state, a pure thought reaction was more direct. But at this moment, the speed of the sand and dust in the surroundings suddenly increased. She originally had a tiny reaction from Gongqi's spiritual wave radiation, but it was also disrupted. For Snake Tongue, the surroundings darkened. She couldn't hear a single sound. It was as if her entire body had been thrown into an endless black hole. Her mind suddenly tightened. A second later, a dim ray of light flooded over and illuminated her surroundings once more. But the source of this radiating light was no longer from Gongqi. At the very least, it wasn't completely. At the border where the two layers of light interweaved, the fluttering sand and dust lost their usual trajectory. It seemed to ripple and distort, as if it were being grabbed by some invisible hand and pulled inward. Sand and dust rubbed and collided with each other. It even stimulated leaping sparks, forming a dynamic chaotic scene of alternating light and darkness. And in this chaotic background, there were several relatively clear silhouettes condensed from the myriad grains of sand and dust. They formed the relief of a human face. The eyes and brows seemed familiar, and the fierce and penetrating rays of light directly illuminated her. Under the stimulation of the rays, Snake Tongue's disturbed thoughts suddenly took form. Chapter 783. Luonan. Snake Tongue obviously remembered Luonan. After all, it was this person who had thrown her into that misty world and trapped her in a city of worry. However, after spending half a year in the clouds, day by day, that person's face had more or less become a little blurry. She could only remember that he was a somewhat neurotic youth. His way of thinking was very different from ordinary people, and his mouth was full of strange theories. Moreover, when his emotions got the better of him, he could do anything. In Snake Tongue's mind, Luonan was a twisted and grotesque figure. He was similar to some sort of symbol, representing a terrible road sign in her life. But at this moment, seeing the relief face condensed in the dust, the symbolic impression suddenly became much more real. At least, this work in the dust and the whole process of its manifestation was deeply engraved in his mind, and it was difficult to forget. An exciting appearance. Gongqi's telepathic thoughts shuttled back and forth in the rays of radiation, on both sides, raising layers of tiny waves. Perhaps he wanted to disturb Luonan's sculpting process a bit, but in the end it didn't happen. This thought only turned into a cold and heavy voice, appearing in the dust storm. In half a year's time, the growth of a young man is always astonishing. Luonan could not tell if this was an evaluation or a conversation. In any case, Luonan did not pay attention to it. Or perhaps this human face relief did not possess the ability to converse. Just as the long silence was about to devolve into awkwardness, Gongqi cleverly shifted the direction of the conversation to Snake Tongue. Illusions will always be shattered, right? Snake Tongue understood the meaning of White House's words. It was she, Tank, and a group of people who had burned the works of Luonan's mother. It was also Luonan's revenge that caused her to lose herself in the clouds and fall into her current predicament. She hated Luonan, and it was impossible for Luonan to forgive her. Given this premise, there wouldn't be the slightest bit of kindness in the fusion of spirit and body that gave her the greatest hope? Was it despair? Snake Tongue only remained silent. However, the silence was quickly broken by an external force. A thought that was different from Gong Qi's penetrated in and restored a familiar voice in their consciousness. I'm sorry. The delay in long-distance communication here is much longer than I thought. Luo Nan. Gong Qi's telepathic thoughts were severed as he responded. It's me. The so-called delay was completely absent from the conversation. Only the dust and sand billowed, and the human face relief in the middle steadily occupied a region. Moreover, it was obvious that a different kind of power had been injected into it. Even when the surrounding environment was in turmoil, it still showed very vivid details. This was especially so for the pair of eyes that were pieced together from an unknown amount of dust and sand. They opened and closed almost naturally, as if they were shining with a cold light. They projected hatred and murderous intent without reservation. Oh, I shouldn't have been so polite. What I should say is, old thief Gong Qi, your time of death has come. Gong Qi wasn't easily provoked into anger. Luo Nan's words and actions were very much in line with the temperament of a young man. However, how could a guy who could endure for half a year to set up an ambush and successfully trick him into a trap be a simple teenager? He continued to sense the surrounding environment, probing the real situation and probing Luo Nan at the same time. Is there only you here? The human-faced relief only stared coldly. Gong Qi laughed involuntarily. Yes, I can imagine. For Ouyang Chun and Wu Jiong to take a fancy to him, there was no need to say more about his potential. From your ability to control this sandstorm, I can see about 70% to 80% of it. However, you're far from learning their magnanimity. You don't know how to share. Such a good place. Luo Nan's face within the dust and mist also laughed. He was most likely amused by Gong Qi's outlandish words. Share this world with you. What about Ouyang Chun and Wu Jiong? Gong Qi strode forward. He was clearly treading on nothingness, but it was as if he was walking on a shady path. He was calm and at ease, at least on the surface. I dare to assert that you absolutely haven't told Ouyang Chun and Wu Jiong about this secret. Otherwise I would have. No, I would have run into those two long ago. That's true. A smile was drawn on Luo Nan's human face relief. He faced Gong Qi, who was gradually approaching, steadily and unwaveringly. Gong Qi spat softly. It's good for a young man to have perseverance and willpower, but if you do it too much, you'll become stubborn. Take you for example. What's the point of hiding this secret? You're just a watchdog that guards the door and eats. I wasn't able to enter before, but now that I've entered, what can you do? Luo Nan's response had just begun when a green-gray radiance suddenly flashed above Gong Qi's spirit body, who was less than 20 meters away. It was as if a rainbow light blade had cut through the air. It sliced diagonally across the human face relief, cleaving it in half. The human face relief collapsed, and the dust and mist sandstorm behind it exploded with a rumble. It formed a momentary turbulence, but it was immediately crushed by the even more tyrannical storm surrounding it. The exquisite work of relief was annihilated without a trace in the short span of a second. It really is a long-distance projection. But do you really think I can't see through your trick of crossing the sea and deceiving the heavens? The green-gray smoke flowed back around Gong Qi's body, swirling around his body. This was a layer of pure essence energy formed from the intersection of life and death. If Gong Qi could truly capture Luo Nan's location, regardless of whether it was his fleshly body or his spiritual body, Gong Qi would be able to pursue and infiltrate Luo Nan's body until Luo Nan died. As for that sneak attack that lacked the demeanor of an expert, he had already reached this point. Demeanor my ass. Gong Qi was already extremely decisive. Unfortunately, Luo Nan was much more cautious than he imagined. Luo Nan was also much more brilliant. Luo Nan was actually able to transmit power from a long distance within this sealed void. Luo Nan was even able to perform such exquisite work. From this, it could be seen that it seems that you've put quite a bit of effort into this maze realm for you to be able to twist the domain fragments into a flower. Moreover, there is certainly a special structural pattern. Did your arrangements in the surroundings come from this? But if you think that you can trap and kill me here with just this, you're indulging in the wildest fantasies. The green-gray smoke outside Gongqi's body spread out once more as he spoke. Layer by layer, it seeped into the dust and mist sandstorm. Smoke and dust exploded everywhere it passed. Lightning was faintly discernible. It was vaguely similar to the scene of Luo Nan molding the human face relief. It was just that what Gongqi made wasn't a tangible object that could be discerned with a glance. Instead, it was a layer of curtains that flowed along with the dust and mist sandstorm. The curtains were woven from domain fragments that were like dust and sand. What Gongqi did was to eliminate the impurities and extract the essence, leaving behind only the structure that was useful to him. It wasn't as refined and detailed as Luo Nan's, but it had its own tyrannical laws lying across it. And all of this was under the control of Gongqi's will. There are many things in the extraordinary level. Imagination alone is far from enough. Extraordinary. Domain. Snake Tongue recognized this powerful power that belonged exclusively to extraordinaries. She was also covered within the curtains. Although she was in her weakest state, and her active perception was practically non-existent, she was still somewhat sensitive to the radiance radiating in from the outside world. The probing situation of radiation radiating from both sides revealed a one-sided situation the instant Gongqi established his extraordinary domain. The radiance that came from Luo Nan was simply crushed and covered, no longer leaving a trace. But then again, that face and that penetrating, fierce, and penetrating radiance still lingered in her mind. It wasn't destroyed by Gongqi's oppressive power. In fact, it became even more vivid. He's still here. This thought inexplicably flashed through Snake Tongue's mind. Before she could find a basis for it, an external force acted upon her and manifested on the plane of consciousness. Indeed, there are some things that I don't quite understand. The curtains erected by Gongqi weren't able to isolate Luo Nan's telepathic transmission. At most, they formed a few insignificant noises. From Snake Tongue's perspective, this couldn't even compare to the confusion created by Luo Nan's words. From my understanding, the strength of extraordinaries, yes, I'm talking about the mental side, is mostly built upon the powerful grasp of the energy storm of the abyssal region. Especially after establishing a solidified configuration. The stable and efficient energy utilization mode and interference mode can practically provide an inexhaustible amount of power. Constructing a so-called domain, with its own unique rules on this foundation, is just a test of logical ability. Am I right? Snake Tongue's train of thought had already been blocked by special terms like the solidified configuration. In comparison, Gongqi was able to understand without any hindrance by combining his own experience. But it was precisely because he understood that he couldn't help but be astonished. Luo Nan was still underage. For this type of up-and-coming talent, it was already outstanding for his soul strength to reach the middle zone. But why did this kid seem to be so familiar with the abyssal region? Half a second later, Gongqi discovered that he was astonished too early. Actually, I don't really understand the mysteries of the abyssal region. I also don't know where that majestic power originates from. I only know that the abyssal region is densely covered with undercurrents, just like the boundless ocean of the deep sea. But the sea is vast and has a boundary. I don't really understand the definition of a boundary. I just know that the power of the Earth's abyssal region doesn't naturally extend to the clouds. Here's the problem, Deputy Secretary General Gong. According to my observations, you've been affected by the sealed spacetime. It's hard for you to utilize the solidified configuration of the Earth's abyssal region. Your strength has been affected a bit, but you haven't reconstructed your configuration in the cloud and abyss region. Even if it's only a temporary one. Why? Gongqi was silent for a moment before asking in reply, yeah, why? I'll call you an old thief because you haven't given up on your evil intentions. Every day, you sense the aura of the solidified configuration that belongs solely to you within the Earth's abyssal region. You pass through the polar domain. That place is high up and illusory. It's transparent and unobstructed. It's like the vacuum of the atmosphere. It isn't obstructed by the barriers of space-time, especially with the sun rising from the clouds these past few months. With a reference, your sense of direction should be much stronger, right? If I give you a few more months of time, who knows what you'll be able to do? Gongqi didn't speak again. In this moment, he restrained all the meaningless reflections of his expression. He just stared with a heavy gaze at the howling dust mist and sandstorm outside the tent. It was as if he wanted to capture the image of Luo Nan's existence from within. Luo Nan's human face relief had been chopped to pieces by Gongqi, but the lines of the young man's eyes and brows were carved into him bit by bit through these difficult and heart-piercing words. Some of them had even broken his flesh and splashed blood, burning with pain. Chapter 784. Was that really Luo Nan in front of him? Gong Qiling's thoughts interweaved and changed. He instinctively wanted to change his previous judgment. This was because what he had experienced so far had already broken away from the common sense constructed over the course of his nearly 100 years of life. A young man who had just stepped into the inner world circle, had a deep understanding of the Abyss region and the Polar realm. It could be explained as a parrot parroting, used specifically to deceive others. But how did Luo Nan accurately grasp the activity of his mental senses come about? Even if it was not completely correct, there was no problem in grasping the trend. Even Gong Qiling himself had never thought about how to grasp the movement trend of a mental type extraordinary, without alarming the target. Aside from years of patient observation and meticulous analysis, there was certainly an extremely high-end observation method. Was there such a method in this world? Was that kid really just a little doggy who overestimated his own capabilities and protected his own food? Were the shadows of Ouyangchen and Wu Jiong hiding behind him? That wasn't right. This wasn't the style of those two at all. Gong Qiling's thoughts were a chaotic mess for a time. There was no fixed conclusion. When he first came to Xia City, he had gone for the exchange of benefits. The 2,000ths of Deep Blue shares and the absolute secret behind In Wang, and the Order of Justice's actions were the things he valued. As for Luo Nan, he just happened to be in a crucial position. He needed to gather information from there. He did not place much importance on him. He just wanted to look at the information. Even though he had fallen into the cloud world and struggled to get out, he had no way of figuring out Luo Nan, a key character. Now that the two sides had collided, he confirmed once more that his understanding of this young man was far from enough, especially when he relied on common sense and logic. It was hard for him to reach a normal conclusion. It was like he had bumped into a dense fog of nothingness. He was completely unable to ascertain what was inside. Perhaps it was empty. Perhaps it was filled with poison. Perhaps it was mixed together with the dust, fog, and sandstorm. The enemy knows me, but I don't know the enemy. There was nothing worse than this from a purely situational point of view. As his thoughts changed, the tent that was spread out within the dust, fog, and sandstorm slowly retracted, representing Gong Qiling's gradual change in attitude. He needed to gather more information. He needed to have more conversations with this young man. With this thought, the noise caused by the interference of the domain was greatly reduced, and the other's thoughts were transmitted again, seemingly ready to have a long talk. Actually, I feel that there is another reason why you haven't reconstructed your solid configuration in the cloud world, other than eliminating the interference. Oh, I'm not an extraordinary. This is just a wild guess. You can evaluate it and see if it's correct. Gongqi appeared to be quite interested. Tell me about it. I'm just thinking that maybe Deputy Secretary General Gong wants to recreate the solidified configuration of the Abyss area on Earth in this cloud world. But he's not willing to, but he can't. For a moment, the curtain that was floating in the dust storm froze. The manifestation of Luo Nan's telepathic thoughts grew clearer and clearer. It should be the effects and limitations of the fleshly body. According to the sparse knowledge I have regarding extraordinaries, the balance of the structure of body and soul, as well as the relationship of interference, are extremely important. Even for the mental side, the accumulation of the fleshly body is very necessary. Correspondingly, if I were to form a solidified configuration in the Abyss region, both the body and the soul cannot be neglected. In this case, if the connection between body and soul is severed, it would be a rather troublesome matter to start anew. A single mishap would result in a conflict between the two, and the foundation would be damaged. Therefore, you'd rather expend a bit more effort to temporarily organize and operate the structure in the clouds. You'd give up a few highly effective methods in order to ensure the purity of the foundation. This way, you can avoid the consequences of creating an odd shape. Of course, these are all my guesses. I still need to verify them. Based on the principle of body and soul cannot be neglected. My spiritual body can't court death in the cloud world. My fleshly body can't cause any trouble on earth. Admittedly, this is stable, but without stimulation, the progress isn't too ideal. Speaking of which, Deputy Secretary General Gong has been away from Earth for half a year. Do you know what the situation is over there? What situation is Chan City? Yes, and what situation is the island where you're hiding in seclusion? Gong Qi's spiritual body's pupils congealed like ice when he heard these three situations. At this moment, he even wanted to create an explosion and completely crush the young man who was still hidden behind the nothingness. But he didn't do that. The young man's thoughts were still transmitted, but it no longer turned into vibrating sound waves. Instead, it controlled some of the sand and dust, as if it was going to remake the human face sculpture. No, it was going to look different. The outline of the image was zigzagging and disorderly. After spreading out, looking at the familiar distribution of land and sea, it was clearly a map of the world. Moreover, as the details were carved, the image gradually changed, showing more detailed and realistic curvature. A few seconds later, it had curled into the shape of a miniature Earth about half a meter in diameter, spinning silently in the sky full of sand. Suddenly, the temporary globe stopped spinning, and the slightly concave area that corresponded to the Pacific Ocean was facing Gongqi. To be precise, it was in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, in the seemingly inconspicuous archipelago area. After another half a second, the entire sphere greatly swelled and deformed, thus achieving the effect of zooming, highlighting the details of a special area in the archipelago area. It's here, right? This is the feast that I've prepared for you for half a year. Please enjoy it. Boom. Gongqi finally did what he had always wanted to do. He created an astonishing explosion within the sandstorm of dust and fog, tearing apart the globe used for the demonstration. He also crushed everything within the range of his power, everything that was not pleasing to the eye. The problem was that no matter how berserk Gongqi unleashed within the misty labyrinth in the distant clouds, no matter how violent his attacks were, no matter how violent his emotions were, he was unable to find a way out before the barrier that separated the two places. The power he stirred up was destined to be unable to affect the local spacetime of the Earth in the slightest. So Luonan's posture didn't change at all on the Ray yacht at Northern Mountain Lake. He really hadn't cast his true body, including his spiritual body, into the cloud world. He would rather spend a bit more energy to communicate with his projection. Gongqi's words were correct. It was impossible to trap and kill him like this, but there was still a follow-up. Luonan wasn't just trying to scare Gongqi. Inla quietly walked in and delivered fragrant coffee. At the same time, she spoke by his ear. The madam has already arrived at the predetermined location. I know. Luonan looked at the time displayed in the lower right corner of the projection area. Today was May 2nd, Thursday. It wasn't a special day. The students of Acumen College were all in class, and he was quite unqualified as an older brother. He urged his little sister to skip class. Rue Wen had arrived at the underground laboratory of gear early in the morning. She had organized all of her equipment, and when Luonan's command was issued, she held on to the assembly box that was taller than her head. She lowered her head slightly. She abandoned her own senses at this moment, allowing Luonan's soul cloak's vast field of view to replace her. She relied on the soul cloak's positioning to lock onto the location of the volcanic archipelago in the middle of the ocean from a distance of 8,000 kilometers away. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference. as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.